Hey everyone, welcome to episode 6 of the Dansg08 podcast. In this one, I will be talking to Mike from FF8 Productions. He is a YouTube content creator and Twitch streamer who specializes in Final Fantasy VII content. We'll be talking about his life, his career, how he got started, and all about streaming, content creation, and of course, Final Fantasy. So I hope you guys enjoy. We had a lot to talk about and plenty more that was still left on the table, and hopefully we will get to do this again and have a round 2 in the future. So I hope you guys enjoy listening. I'll leave you to it. What's up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome to another Dansg08 podcast. And this time I am joined by Mike from FF8 Productions. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to get to chat to you. It's another one of these Final Fantasy channels that I've seen on the platform for years. And over the past few weeks, we got to interact with each other on Discord and stuff. And it's nice to be able to chat like this as well. So it should be a fun episode.
Yeah, I'm gonna have fun. I haven't done a podcast in a long time. I did my own podcast a long time ago for like 4 people, and but that was more for our friends to get together and talk games. So, yeah, it's really nice to just interact.
Exactly. I think for me, that's been the main premise of this whole thing. It's not really been to, try and create this new content that's going to grow the channel or whatever. It's just been a sort of, for me at least, I see a lot of Final Fantasy channels, but I don't think we're that particularly collaborative with each other, and we should be we're not that big a community. So I think it's nice to try and sort of bring together these Final Fantasy channels under the same umbrella.
Yeah, it's been that way for a long time, actually. I've always felt like the Final Fantasy community is usually a kind of a watch and move on community, not as much of a get together and do stuff community. Like a lot of communities I'm a part of, like speedrunning communities or even like some other retro game communities, they get together, do tournaments, or get together and do events and stuff. And Final Fantasy, for whatever reason, just seems to be more of a watch a certain channel's content and then move on to watch someone else's content. And it's just kind of a content driven community, not as much like a get together and do events. So
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing that I tend to talk about with people is that for me, it feels like Final Fantasy as a franchise in terms of its scale, like in the gaming community, it feels very big. But on YouTube, for some reason, it always feels a bit underrepresented to me. Like when I look at the channels that make primarily Final Fantasy content, there really aren't that many giant channels. Like I was talking to Final Fantasy Union on a recent podcast, and I think their channel has just over 200,000 subscribers, which given how huge Final Fantasy is, and that to me they're one of basically the biggest around, 200k is really not that big. What do you think about that whole phenomenon?
I feel like part of that actually is because of the decline in Let's Plays over the years, because Final Fantasy is kind of a Let's Play type of content a lot of the time. With big RPGs and stuff, the first thing people are drawn to is just a Let's Play of it, whether or not they want to relive what they played before. Maybe they don't own it anymore, or they don't have the time to. A lot of people tell me they don't have the time to put in to play all the way through every Final Fantasy, and so they want to see Let's Plays of them just to get the general gist of the story. And then you have breakdown videos and stuff. But again, those are only one-time deal. Like you only watch a breakdown of Final Fantasy VII story once or twice, and then you move on to something else. So I guess maybe that's part of it. But I know Let's Plays have declined in general over the years. Less people do them or watch them. And if it's a Let's Play, it's more of like a Minecraft Let's Play or something, where it's kind of just a never-ending random spew of people coming in and going out. It's not just one person sitting down playing a game from start to finish. That seems to be less popular now. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know. It is an interesting question, though, especially, I remember when the remake first got really announced, not, the years and years where they were talking about it, but when it officially got announced and was coming out, a lot of people had commented on my channel and said oh, you're going to blow up when the remake comes out. You are just going to have millions of subscribers. You're going to be the biggest channel on YouTube. You just wait. And I remember kind of being like, I appreciate those comments, but that's not going to happen. I'm going to get a couple views on my Let's Play of it, and I'll have some big videos about it, and then that's going to be it, and everyone's going to move on. That's just kind of the way it goes with RPG communities, I guess. And the Final Fantasy community in general. But it is a question. I don't know. I don't really know if there's more to it than just that. I mean, Final Fantasy VII is huge. It really is. Like it has been for a long time. Um, and even when Final Fantasy 15 came out, it was huge. It sold really, really well, even though a lot of people disliked it. It still sold incredibly well. So I don't know why it sells so well, yet it doesn't really hit as well for the channels.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about the decline of the Let's Play, and I think at this point, in case there's any listeners that haven't seen your channel or they don't follow you, it might be cool to. It's already been implied, but give us a little taste of what you generally tend to focus on with your content on the internet.
Oh, sure. So I've been a Final Fantasy VII, the main Final Fantasy VII guy on YouTube for a long time. The big materia guides and strategy guides and all that. That's kind of what I got popular for. But a lot of people know me as the Final Fantasy VII guy, but I do a bunch of other stuff as well. I've been making YouTube content since 2008. Um, and over the years have just done many different things. Nowadays, I work on Final Fantasy VII stuff. I'm also doing a Let's Play series. We just talked about how Let's Plays aren't popular anymore, so go watch my Let's Play. No, I'm doing a Let's Play of every Final Fantasy game from 1 to 15 and beyond, and some bonus ones as well. But something I've always wanted to do is do a Let's Play of every single game in order. So that's a giant task. And I've done big marathons in the past. I did a marathon of every Crash Bandicoot game. I did a marathon of every Spyro game. And it just kind of fit to combine the Let's Plays I've done in the past with the marathons I've done in the past and do a marathon of Let's Plays. So we're doing, right now we're in Final Fantasy V and we're going through them all in order. And then we have a bunch of extra games that we're going to play as well, like Final Fantasy Tactics. And I also do challenge run content. I've done challenge runs ever since I was a kid. It's one of my favorite things to do. Um, and alongside that is also Final Fantasy VII mods. We have a big modding community. And honestly, the Final Fantasy VII modding community has been big for a long time, but uh, just like we were talking about with the Final Fantasy community, they're super separated. You know, it's just one person makes a mod and they throw it up on a website, and a couple people say pretty cool mod, and then it disappears. And we've seen a resurgence over the last couple of years of people actually going in and finding these mods and collecting them and sharing them. And so now finally these mods are starting to get out and more people are seeing them. Like the new threat mod has been super popular now. A couple big streamers have played it and people are seeing more of it. And so we do a bunch of Final Fantasy VII mod content. I made some of my own Final Fantasy VII mods. Some of the people in my community have made mods. So there's the challenge runs, and then some of the mods are also kind of like challenge mods. And then I've also been in speedrunning for a bit as well. So all over the place. I've done all sorts of things, but most people know me as the Final Fantasy VII guide, mod, challenge guy.
hmm I think for people listening that maybe haven't come across your channel anymore, that story is going to sound very familiar because I've always seen you as like the Final Fantasy VII to my Final Fantasy X,
Yeah,
in that sense.
right.
I mean, anyone obviously that follows my channel already knows that we've done a lot of the same things, and I guess at this point, because I'm obviously working through a mod too, I think the only thing that's probably not the areas where we differ the most probably is that nowadays you stream a lot. And you also you do the speedrunning stuff. So some of the stuff that you've talked about, like in your channel stuff, we're definitely going to go deeper into those. I do want to talk about that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
But for me as well, I mean, the way I discovered your channel was definitely the Final Fantasy VII guide stuff that you created because they're so well made. They tell you exactly what you need to know, and they're really invaluable for like people that's new to the game. And you kind of there's multiple levels of it. There's more basic videos and there's more like advanced tactics and combinations and that kind of thing. And I remember when I was doing my Final Fantasy VII playthrough, your videos were definitely very helpful, and that's what put you on my radar. And I mean, I've always said it, and people know me always know I don't watch other Let's Players, so I don't really sit down and watch other people play through games. I'm kind of too busy doing that myself, and it's just like I don't have the time to watch others do it too, if that makes sense. And so, but like despite that, I mean, when it comes to like more one-off content that you've created, like the guides and that kind of thing, I've always been a fan of those, and you clearly obviously have a great passion for Final Fantasy VII, and you've got a cool community and that kind of stuff. So I definitely wanted to reach out and chat to you about that stuff as well. So
Yeah, it's funny how similar it is with you finding me for my Final Fantasy VII like guides and stuff. I remembered your name from your old Final Fantasy X challenge stuff
hmm,
because when I got first into challenge running, I used to just go on GameFAQ forums and just
hmm,
read kind of the same way we were saying about Let's Plays. I wouldn't watch the entire challenge from start to finish, but I'd go into their game facts and just see like the strategies they used and like some of the crazy stuff they came up with to do Final Fantasy X NSG and SNO, or
hmm.
Final Fantasy VII low level challenges and stuff. And I used to love looking at that kind of stuff. And it's funny that we both kind of started from Final Fantasy challenges, you from 10 and me from 7, and then just kind of slowly built up from there. And I still have so many Final Fantasy VII challenge videos on my channel that have like 10 views, and they're still my favorite thing because that's what I used to do. Is I just sit down and just grind away at challenges, doing hundreds of attempts on something that no one really cared about, but it was
Hmm.
always my way of getting more mileage out of what I had.
Yeah, I think that it definitely, for me, the main catalyst of even trying challenges was definitely to do with mileage because yeah, I was just at that stage with Final Fantasy X where I'd played it a lot, and you have this, like some games, you just have this feeling of you just can't get enough, and you just need some other way to experience it. You just want to keep playing, and you kind of create excuses for yourself to just keep playing the game. And I think that for me was like the catalyst of why I wanted to get into the challenge stuff. And so I think it'd be a good time to like, wind the clock back and for you to tell us your story with Final Fantasy VII. So how did this whole passion get started?
Oh well, I started my YouTube channel when I was 16, and the very first video I made, it's gonna blow your mind. You're gonna want to go back and watch it because it's one of the greatest videos you'll ever see. Was a line rider video.
Okay.
Uh, it was a peak 2008 unregistered Hypercam 2 video where I basically just had my line rider guy get stuck in a weird glitch spot, and I recorded it. And I remember I made several of them, and I used Notepad because I didn't know how to video edit. So I just used
Sure.
Notepad and I typed in like what I wanted to say and just recorded the Notepad text. So it's like super peak 2008 content.
I
Um,
mean, to be honest, that's still, I think I would say that's like two steps above my first video in 2008. I think we're probably born the same year. I was born in 1991, so I was 16 when I started as well.
I'm 92, but it was earlier. So yeah, we were both the same
Okay.
age.
Yeah, pretty much. It's crazy how similar it is. Literally, we both made our first videos in 2008,
Yeah.
and at age 16 is crazy. Like my one was literally, I didn't even because I wasn't playing on a PC or anything. I was playing on a CRT TV. I just recorded it with my phone. I just had giant interlacing lines like going
Oh yeah.
through the screen. So it was absolutely horrible.
That's the good
Oh
stuff.
yeah, like it's the best of stuff, but it was just so bad. And it I don't think it had audio. I think I muted my TV because like the audio sounded so horrible. I didn't put any text on it or anything like that. I just had absolutely no idea what I was doing. The only thing I knew how to do was play Final Fantasy X, and I was like, I want to share some stuff from this.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to see how far it's come now. It's really weird.
Yeah, it's awesome looking back. And I've never done the thing that YouTube I understand why they do it, but I've never done the thing that YouTubers do where they remove old videos or just private them.
Hmm.
I completely understand why they do it because when someone lands on your page, you want them to only see like your best content
Hmm.
or just content that's like similar to what you do now because my content has changed dramatically. I mean, now I'm a PG channel. I have been for
Hmm.
a while, but back before in 2010, 2011, I was into like angry video game nerd, and back then everything was just cuss as loud as you can at the TV because it's funny.
Hmm.
So a lot of my content was like cussing every other word and rage content, which was just super duper popular back then.
Hmm.
So for that to be on my channel now, and then for my channel to be like a PG channel, it's really goofy. But I keep all that stuff because I think it's really important to see where people have come from and see the development of their character over time. And I just can't remove those old videos. I mean, I still go back and watch the Line Rider videos and just think how ridiculous it is that I'm here now. Um, But anyway, so I actually got into YouTube just because I wanted to see like what was going on with it. It was there was no aspiration whatsoever. It was no, I want to show off this cool thing or I want to be a YouTube star, which wasn't even a thing back then.
No.
But it was literally just like, hey, what's this website? And I learned how to record the line writer videos, so I tried that, and that was cool, and I enjoyed putting it together, so I just kept doing it. And then one day I went to Best Buy. I remember this so clearly. I don't know why I remember this so clearly, but I do. I went into Best Buy. I went in to buy a game. Don't remember what the game was. And on my way out, I saw Call of Duty 4 sitting on the shelf, and it was on sale. And I had never played a Call of Duty game. I wasn't even into shooters. I was into RPGs. I like shooter games weren't even on my interest at all. But it was on sale, and I saw it, and I remember seeing it and being like, "Why would I buy that?" And then going to walk away, and then doing like a double take, and just being like, "You know what? Why not? I'll pick it up. Like expand my horizons. Who knows?" And then I took that home, played it, and Call of Duty 4 changed a lot of things for me because at the time I was in middle school and I was super introverted. I ended up being a lot more extroverted in high school and kind of found myself and learned how to, talk to people and be more active. But at the time in middle school, I was super introverted to the point where like I was even getting bullied a bit. It wasn't terrible, but I was just a really shy kid. And Call of Duty 4 was a way for me to meet people and join communities and just talk to people openly and not have to worry about consequences. And I joined a bunch of different communities in Call of Duty 4, and I was pretty good at the game. I wasn't amazing, but I was pretty good at the game. So that got me, that was kind of my in. That was, people wanted to play with me because I was decent and they could put me on their team and it wouldn't be terrible. So that got me in, and I started getting in with communities, and I started making Call of Duty 4 content for YouTube because why not? I bought a Dazzle,
Oh
the
yeah, I remember
little
those.
the little composite to USB recorder that
Yeah.
was like 30 seconds behind when you recorded with it.
Yeah.
But I got one of those and I started recording glitch videos, which is so funny to me now because I had no reason to record glitch videos. I wasn't really into glitches. But fast forward to now, it's like one of the biggest things I do.
Yeah.
I'm known for breaking games. In pretty much every game I play, I break it in some way. And most of my most popular videos, if it's not a Final Fantasy VII tutorial thing, it's a glitch video or how I'm breaking Final Fantasy VII.
Hmm.
So I find it hilarious that that was like the first thing I did. But I uploaded a video called Five Secret Rooms in Call of Duty 4, and that video, it didn't go viral or anything, but it got some views, and nowadays it's still one of my most viewed videos. It went viral a bit later kind of, and now it's like almost at 1 million, I think.
Hmm.
um, but at the time it got like a couple thousand views, which to me was like insane. And so I kept making it, kept making glitch videos, and kept making Call of Duty content, and got a little bit of a following there, but it was all just for like complete fun. I just enjoyed doing it. It was a complete hobby. It was never something I wanted to do officially or for money or anything like that. It was legitimately just a hobby. And that is kind of the most important thing to me, is that I've kept that all the way to now in 2021. I still do it as a hobby. I still do it for fun. I do it for the community. I do it for all the people around me that support me. I've never ever once done anything specifically for money. The only reason I do it as a living is because when I started my live show in 2016, a bunch of my YouTube viewers came over and said, "Hey, we want to like make this a thing for you. Like, we want to support you and we want you to keep doing this." And they made it a show. And because of that, I've always gone at this with the idea of my community made this a show, not me.
Hmm.
I'm just the spearhead, but it's their show, right?
Hmm.
So I've always gone about it with that direction, and I've always tried to do things that involve my community. And I've never done like sponsorships or anything like that.
Hmm.
It's all just complete donation, and I just do what I think is best for the community at all times, and I just do it that way. And it's really awesome because I read a lot of issues with other YouTubers where like when the adpocalypse happened on YouTube,
Yeah.
they panicked and had to take all these sponsorships to continue making money, and then fans backlashed at them because they didn't like the fact that they were doing reads during videos and stuff. And I'm very fortunate, and I never take it for granted that I don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
Hmm.
My show is just 100% complete donation. If the fans stop liking what I'm doing, then I'll stop doing it. And if they keep liking it, then I'll keep doing it. And I've always just gone with that mindset. I never have to like sacrifice the quality of my content to make enough money to continue making it. And I totally get why people do that. And I never fault people for doing that. I never fault YouTubers for doing ads or anything like that, because that's what you got to do. If you get into it with a certain idea, I need this much money to run this show, and then
Hmm.
suddenly you're making less than that, you have to do something about it, right?
Sure.
But I've never kind of gone with that. I've always just gone with, if the money is there, I'll do it. If it's not, I won't. And that's fine with me. Like, this does not have to be my career. I never went into it as my career. I went to school for something completely different. And then this just kind of fell in my lap. So I'm super duper fortunate that I can do that. And I don't know many content creators that can do it that way. So I've always been really, really fortunate. And the Final Fantasy VII stuff, it came after the Call of Duty stuff. I did it for a couple years, and then I switched over to Final Fantasy VII because what I really wanted to do, and it was my favorite game. And I remember I got a bunch of backlash for doing Final Fantasy VII content because people expected Call of Duty content, right?
Yeah.
So I got like a bunch of backlash. But again, this was not something I wanted to do for a living. This was just me making videos. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna keep making these Final Fantasy VII videos because I like them. And I did my first challenge video was Final Fantasy VII I debut initial weapon, which is like
Okay.
super easy,
Hmm.
but I wanted to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I think if you go back and look at those videos, they still have like 50 views. Um, but that's what I wanted to do, and I just kept growing from there. And I've done, man, so many different things over the years, but I'm still the same guy that made Call of Duty videos back in the day. It's still just a hobby of mine that I just continue to do. It just kind of grew up to be something that I could make bigger.
Yeah. Once again, I mean, we're very similar in that sense. I think it's definitely a blessing that you've kind of taken that to another level where you're almost completely independent of like your YouTube ad revenue and that kind of stuff. And I think that's definitely a great way to do it if you can. And I think the model that you have works really well for you. I mean, you said that you went to school for something else and like it was always a hobby and that kind of thing. I always like to hear about that kind of transition. So, what were you studying in school? Did you start doing a different job and YouTube was just like this part-time thing? How did that whole transition go?
Yeah, okay. So I went to school. I was doing YouTube, just like everyone else would back when it wasn't such a star-studded thing. It was just something that everyone did for a hobby,
Hmm.
and some people made money. So I did it like on the weekends, and just at night I would just record videos and upload them for fun. And I was going to college. I went to Kent State, and I went for computer science at first, and then I realized I hated programming. Just I was not good at it. I tried my best, but it just was not my thing. So I switched out of that and went to the communication school, and I ended up getting a bachelor's in interpersonal communication
Okay.
and a double minor in math and computer science.
Hmm.
And then I graduated college, and I had had nothing but like side jobs up to that point. So then I had to find a job that was in my field, and I couldn't find anything. So I looked and I looked and I looked and couldn't really find anything that fit. And so I made my own job. I decided to do websites for businesses around my area.
Hmm.
And so I made my own little business. I called it 48 Sites because 48 Productions, 48 Sites. Might as well keep the name similar. And just started doing websites for like little businesses around my neighborhood. I'd find like a hair salon that maybe had an outdated website, and I would just walk in, just cold call them basically, and just be like, "Hey, I can make a cool website for you if you want to pay me." And just did that for a while. It was a hustle, it was a lot of work because I had to pretty much just cold call everyone. But I made enough money to at least survive. And then about 2016, and it was like January. I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. No one was paying me on time
Yeah.
because it was just a bunch of mom and pop shops, and no one that I really worked with had a. They, I guess, they just weren't really. We're not talking about making websites for big official companies. It was just little mom and pop shops. So they paid me when they had their money. And it was just hard. It was, I never knew how much money I was going to have every month, and the website stuff was very similar to programming. And I quickly realized that unless I used the same default spread for like every website, I just couldn't really get in there and get dirty and make like apps for people. So it just didn't seem like the right fit for me. So I quit doing that and I started looking for another job. And when I was looking for another job, at the time, I was home a lot, just searching for jobs. I decided to start a live show, and I had done Twitch before, back when it was super duper early, back when it was Justin TV,
Okay.
and just to try it out, I just did like a few live shows with friends, and I did one charity event with some friends that was really fun. But it was not an official show; it was just a one-off thing. But I had the idea of what it was like. And so I decided I have all this extra time on my hands. I might as well start this live show. So I started 48 Live. I made an official show. I connected it to the YouTube and said, this is going to be my new live show that I do. And I did it like 3 days a week, I think. Um, and that's when, like I said before, a lot of my YouTube viewers came over to Twitch. I guess this was kind of that time when Twitch was starting to really hit it big, and people were deciding if they wanted to start watching Twitch just as much as they wanted to watch YouTube. Or some people stuck to YouTube, some people made the jump to Twitch, and some people watch both. Um, but a lot of my YouTube viewers came over and they said, we love what you're doing and we loved your YouTube videos, and this Twitch thing seems cool. We want to support you. And I started a Patreon around the same time and just said, hey, if you want to support, great. If not, don't worry about it. I'm looking for a job. Like, you don't need to throw your money at me, but if you do want to see this, you can.
Hmm.
And that was when the transition happened. That's when I was, I looked at how many people wanted to support, and I said, maybe I can make this work. And so I went to my wife and I said, it looks like maybe I could make this my job. I never wanted this to be my job, but it's looking like maybe I can do it. I need like 2 or 3 months to try it and see if it works. And I don't know how much money I'm going to make in that time. But my plan is, if I'm making at least minimum wage by the time that third month is over, maybe I'll go for this. And my wife, being the awesome person she is, she's like, all right, do it. We had, let's see, my son wasn't on the way yet, but we were currently in the process of adopting my first son. And so money was extremely tight. And going up to my wife and telling her, I don't know how much money I'm going to make in the next 3 months, was not the ideal at all. But she knew that I had been doing this as a hobby since I was 16 years old. And for this to become my job would be the dream. And so she was like, go for it. What do we got to lose other than everything? And I was like, good point. So she was awesome. She let me go for it. I went for it. I took 3 months. I started doing the live show 4 days a week, and doing YouTube content on the fifth day, and just went like crazy 500% into it just to see if it would work. And by the third month, I was making a bit more than minimum wage. So here we are now. I continued doing it. And 4 years later, here we are.
Wow. That's awesome. I was chatting to someone last week again. I always like, one of the main reasons I want to do this thing is just to hear people's stories, and for listeners to know more about the people behind the channels, because sometimes, like you say, it's so, especially for YouTube, it's so content driven that if they've only, let's say, come to your channel and they've only seen your Final Fantasy VII videos, it might be like, oh yeah, he makes great content, but they don't, maybe if they don't watch your live stuff, they don't really get to know you so much, they don't know your story. But it's always just so cool to hear this stuff, and there's always like these common threads that you spot when you listen to people's stories, like the way that your wife kind of supported you, and you guys took a risk to make this happen. And I was speaking to someone last week who was just like, I didn't have a job and I didn't have a place to stay. I said to my sister, like, can you just give me 2 months like rent free so I can really dedicate myself to this YouTube thing? I want to make it work. And she said, okay, fine, like, you can do it. And so there's always like this sort of, I think people of our era, like people that started when we started, it was just such a unique and like unprecedented way to make a living that it was just everyone has their own sort of unique story of getting into it, but there's always like these common threads, which is just always fascinating to listen to. But I mean, you made it work, man.
Yeah, it reminds me of the music industry like 30 years ago,
Yeah.
where you always hear these stories about the musicians that are popular today when they were first starting off. It's always in someone's garage, and they started a garage band, and then the garage band split up because someone was cheating on someone else's girl, and then there's a falling out, and then somehow one of them ends up big. Like it's always some ridiculous story. I feel the same way about this stuff. And you're right, it's unprecedented because it's something that, I mean, I talk to my wife about this all the time because she's a teacher,
Hmm.
and all of her kids think it's crazy. Like, I guess when we were kids, we used to have like the the career days where everyone would be like, oh, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a this, I want to be a that. And I think when we were younger, I think like musician or the more crazy jobs that like are impossible to get, like a football legend or a musician or something, that's what we would all pick. Well, nowadays it's all YouTube or Twitch star. That's
Yeah,
what she gets. 90% of her kids want to
that's
be a
crazy.
YouTuber, Twitch star, and it makes perfect sense because that's what they watch. That's what they see the most of. That's what they look up to, and so it makes sense to them that that's what they would do when they grow up. But I tell her, like, make sure you let them know. I mean, it's the same thing as like being an astronaut. It's a very low chance, even if you're good, even if you make content for a very long time, even if you're the best content, it's still a chance. You don't know what's going to happen. It's only that one kid out of the garage band that makes it big, and the rest of them fail miserably.
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah, that's the new, it's the new dream job. It's the new dream job for kids. And
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the music thing because I that's an example that I give a lot when I talk to people about this business. Is to me it really does feel like that, and the reason I say it is more it's kind of, I guess it's motivating in some way to someone who wants to do it, but it's also kind of crushing. It just depends on their philosophy. It's like for when it comes to music, it's very clear that it's not literally always the most talented and best musician or best vocalist that ends up becoming the most famous or the most rich or whatever. I mean, there's just thousands and thousands and millions of just like really talented people that get absolutely nowhere. And YouTube is much the same. I mean, there is absolutely, to me, there is no way that you could say that it's the best content on YouTube that always makes it to the top and that kind of thing. So
I would say even more so because the barrier to entry is far lower.
agreed.
Music, you at least have to learn an instrument. Like you gotta learn an instrument, and you have to be at least good enough that you don't get booed out of your own house.
Mm,
But YouTube has zero barrier to entry. Stuff like TikTok and stuff has zero barrier of entry. If you have a phone or your parents have a phone, you can make, any kind of content you want and throw it on the internet.
absolutely.
So it's like that times 100. It's every single kid throwing something up and hoping it goes viral. And so you do have to like put them down and be like, listen, I know you want to do this and it's cool that you want to try it. And I say go for it, but have a backup because it is so rare that you make it or even get to the point where you can have it as a side hustle, even. It's like
Hmm.
most of the stuff is just going to hit the wall and fall right off. That's
Yeah,
just the way it goes.
yeah. I mean, for my own path, I was always a bit more kind of. I guess I always looked at it more as like a backup kind of thing. I never. There's a video I made, I think in like 2014, I believe it was, where basically I kind of announced that I'm kind of, I'm not quitting YouTube. It's still something I'm going to carry on, but I'm heading out to pursue like other dreams and other career aspirations and stuff that I have. Because for me, it just like I think especially because it was so new in like the early 2010s and that kind of thing, you have no point of reference for what you're doing, and you don't know anyone else that's a YouTuber. You don't it's just you're completely on your own,
Mhm.
and you don't know if YouTube's going to be around in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years. You don't know how much you're going to potentially earn in 2 years. Like you might be making $200 a month now, and you might think, well, if I carry this on, maybe I can make that 1,000. But there's absolutely zero guarantee that that's going to happen. And so you kind of go through this like completely blindly. And well, at the same time, you're at that period of your life where you kind of you kind of need to start off in the right way so that you carry on in the right way. And I guess everyone's different, but if you come from like a culture or a background where your parents are like, you need to have a reliable job, you got a degree, you should go into something related to your field, you might have like, a family someday, you need a stable income, all this sort of stuff. Life kind of forces you to go down that path to an extent. So it's even harder to say, you know what, screw all of that sort of conventional stuff. We got this thing going on here that could literally disappear tomorrow, but I'm still going to try and go for this and take this risk anyway and dedicate all this time into it. But for me, it was always a side thing, literally until like probably late 2018 or so, because I couldn't go all in, like especially when I wasn't making, what I would consider, just like you say, like in somewhere like London, like a minimum wage or anything like that. I was like, this too big a risk, and I had to really just wait until I could get to that sort of financial level before I could say, okay, fine, like I'm literally just going to dedicate myself to this and just do it full time. So people like you just took a much bigger risk, man, and so I definitely respect the risk that you guys had to take to get here.
Oh, and back then the dream wasn't even real. Like who do you have to look up to in like 2010? Angry Video Game Nerd, maybe
Hmm.
back before then, maybe like Ray William Johnson. I mean,
Yeah.
who there really wasn't. There were a couple huge names, and then that was it. But nowadays, you have like esports, and you have just Twitch celebrities, and you have YouTube celebrities, and you have like Twitch Con, where people go and you can see them in person, and they're like celebrities and stuff. I mean, it's way bigger now to the point where you can really see it as a dream. Whereas back then, we had no idea if YouTube was going to be a thing in a couple of years. So to make the jump was hard. And I find that even, I mean, the dream for all of us is to just kind of do it slowly until it becomes your job.
Hmm.
Like maybe the first couple weeks you make a couple cents, and then the next couple weeks you make a couple dollars, and then you just keep going until it eventually makes you enough money. But seems like everyone I talk to, there is always that one moment where you go all in, and that can be super scary and it can be hard. And I never thought I'd have a moment like that because, like I said, I never even wanted to do it as a living in the first place.
Hmm.
But that's what happened. It fell in my lap. There were a bunch of people saying we want to support you, and I, talked to my wife and said I think we can make it work. And there was that moment where I said, all right, I'm going to stop looking for a job and start doing this because you can't do both. If you're looking for a job and you're going to interviews and stuff, you're not putting in your 200%.
Hmm.
You're not thinking of events that you want to do in the future. That's going to take a lot of your time and effort. You're really just sitting down and making one video at a time. And that's never going to be the big enough of a gap to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. I mean, ever since I went full time into YouTube, there has been my channel. I've always been fortunate that it's always had a slow and steady increase. It's always been the same. There's never been like a period where it just went exponential and just went mad. Like it's always been the same. Even today, it's the same. But in terms of like the return I've gotten since I've mentally fully dedicated myself to it, I definitely noticed that it's improved. And eventually, for people in our position, there does come a time when you really do have to just take a plunge. Everyone takes it at different points in their story, but you know, I was just very fortunate to ever be able to do it in the first place, and the fact that we managed to get here is always, of course, a blessing. I think one thing I've definitely noticed, and if we're talking about how to sort of help people and recommend people to get into these things, I realized quite early on, once I got into the whole Patreon stuff, I think it was late 2015 or early 2016. And I think for people like me, at least, again, probably because we just don't have enough people around us that were doing it and that valued it or understood it, like especially like 8 years ago, 10 years ago. I think we always kind of undervalued ourselves in that sense. It was always very difficult for me to imagine like, oh, if I have a Patreon for $5, someone's actually going to spend $5 a month to support my content. Like, why?
Oh yeah.
Especially if I'm not going to like paywall, because I'm one of those weird people where I'm like, oh, I have a Patreon, but I'm not going to paywall any content. It's like, well, that's a bit dumb, but I didn't want to do it because I just didn't want, I never wanted someone to say that I can't afford to watch your content, and that always just sounded like a wrong. I never want to hear that. So the only thing I wanted to do was just like early access or whatever. But eventually, everyone's going to get to see that content, whether you contribute like $5 or nothing. And so that's why I think it took me much longer to realize that that was even an option. And so I started the Patreon thing, and like there was a few people that joined, and it was great and all that kind of stuff. And then some time went by, and like I'm seeing the more the whole thing grew, I was just like seeing Patreons for like other people, and they had like tiers where it was like $10, $20, $50, $100, $200, $500, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, really? Like, there's people out there that's like paying $500 to like a content creator, or a cosplayer or whatever it might be. It was just madness. Like, I just couldn't believe it, and I was seeing that, and I was like, well, what do I have to lose? Like, I've got $5 here. Maybe I'll make a $15 tier. Maybe someone thinks my content's worth that much. Who am I to tell them they're wrong, right? And so I started to do that, and I was like, well, I guess I can try and up this sort of thing. And I just threw them in as like, there's nothing to lose. If literally no one goes for it, who cares? They can just join a lower tier. And so, I had a few people join, and I remember, I don't know if he's listening, but he'll know who he is if he's listening. I remember like a higher tier patron. I remember asking him, I was like, dude, like, why? Like, explain to me from your perspective why you're paying me this much. I really want to understand, because like I don't do it myself. Like, I'm not a $15 patron of anything. Like, I've got Netflix and stuff, but that's Netflix. It's not like, Mike or Berg, Dansg08, whatever. I don't do it myself. So why? Like, I don't get it. And he gave me like an interesting example, which I thought, okay, like that kind of actually makes sense for the first time. He said that he's a fan of films, and that he goes to the cinema like once a week, like in his, well, used to, I guess. He can't go anywhere in the pandemic, but he used to. And he said, I forgot the number, but he said, let's say I spend $20 a week on going to the cinema, and that gets me 2 or 3 hours of entertainment a week. Well, for that I spend like $80 a month. He said, well, when it comes to your channel, I watch your channel for like 5 hours a week, let's say, or whatever. And so to me, paying you, or like supporting you at $15 for 4, 5, 6, 10 hours of entertainment a week, for me, it's something that I'm perfectly happy to do. And I was like, it's so like weird when you think of it like that. But I think that was like the catalyst to realizing that, I guess, if you're looking at it a bit more sort of financially, and to sort of free yourself from the shackles of like ad revenue, and having to chase views and clickbait and all that kind of stuff, and sort of, like you say, throw stuff at the wall and just see what sticks. You have to try to find a way to cultivate a small but dedicated community that's willing to support you. Because I tell people all the time, like, on Patreon, if you're like a $5 patron, I did the maths on it, and the amount of views that $5 a month equates to is just ridiculous. And it's like, I think probably somewhere in the region of like 2,000 views, I think, something like that, 2,500 views. So one person has the power of 2,500 viewers to my channel financially. And so when I started to think of it like that, it's like, well, I never wanted to be like big on YouTube. I never cared about having like 100,000 subscribers, 1 million subscribers, or being super popular. For me, the dream was always, can I create content that people like, where I can financially sustain myself doing it? Like, I don't mind having 10,000 subscribers and earning the same revenue if the feedback is the same and the community is still the same. And so that's why I started to sort of try and leverage a bit more of the community support element. And that's like, it's not the same as it is for you, in the sense that I'm not like entirely independent from the views and all that kind of stuff. But it definitely took my channel to a different level once I started embracing and understanding the sort of community support element, and it's just been so huge for me.
Yeah, man, that's what it's all about. It's all about getting a community that cares about you, and I was the same way. I never wanted to be I tell my Twitch chat this all the time. Like, I would, because sometimes people will come in and say like, "Oh, what would you do if you got raided by some like huge Twitch channel?" And I'm like, "Listen, I would rather have 10 people watching me that actually care about what I'm doing than 10,000 people watching me because it's like a meme, you know.
Yeah.
It's all about that small community. And even back in my Call of Duty days, I used to make videos where we would just be standing around making jokes, and that was the best thing ever. Having, 10 people in the video, and then I put hours into the editing process, and then I put it on YouTube and it gets 10 views. One from me and one from the people in the video, and that was the
Yeah.
best time because I knew that the 10 people that watched that loved it,
Hmm.
and that's what it was all about. And I feel the same way about getting to this point. If I had stayed at 10 people in the video, 10 views on the video until now, I'd still be loving it. And I'd still be sure. Definitely could not dedicate as much time,
Hmm.
probably make a video a month or something,
Yeah.
having a wife and two kids, but
Hmm.
I'd still be loving it. And I would still have that community that mattered to me. And it was hard for me making that transition. Like I said, when I told my wife I wanted to do it full time, um, the it's hard to see that money coming in and thinking like I'm earning this, you know.
Hmm.
Maybe it's easier now because kids are growing up with it. Kids are growing up with these Twitch celebrities that make a bunch of money, so if they make a Twitch channel and make some money, it just seems natural. But for us it's not natural. For us
Yeah.
it's like this is new territory. And so I remember when I made my Patreon, I made the $1 tier, just give you everything. And I still have that. Basically, I have the $1 gets you everything except like Discord tiers. So like you
Hmm.
get a different color of Discord name in the Discord, and then there's like some other random things. But for the most part, the $1 gets you all the videos, just everything.
Hmm.
And I like it that way. It makes it feel like you pay $1 to be in the community, and that's I would make it free, but just having the community there, I think it's funny. I think the $1 just means that like they're willing to go all in themselves. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
they are willing to actually spend, because there's a big gap between free content and $1 content.
True.
So that $1 means like, yes, I do want to be part of the community and see extra stuff, but that is all I'm asking of you. Like just making that commitment of $1. If you're gonna pay more, that's wild and crazy, and I can't believe you're doing it. But go ahead. So like, and I felt the same way when I started the Twitch channel, and a lot of people were coming over from YouTube, and they were donating a lot of money. And I was like, why are they donating all this money? I just started Twitch. And a lot of times the comments I would get would be like, I've been watching YouTube content since 2008, and I've watched you for the last 14 years. And so I'm just now paying you for all of this content you've given me over all these years. And I'm like, okay, that makes a bit more sense, right? But I think the most important thing is do what you think is right. You know, there are always going to be people that even a $1 Patreon, they're going to be like, wow, this guy's just trying to make
Of
money.
course.
Like this
Yeah.
guy's just trying to squeeze every cent out of his viewers. You
Yeah.
could do 99 charity events and one event where you try to fundraise for yourself, and people will look at that one fundraising event and be like, wow, look at this guy.
Yeah.
So I think you just got to do what you think is right. If you think a $5 Patreon tier is what you want to value your stuff at, then that's what you need to do. If you think that a $1 is, if you think that a $20 is, if you think that doing an ad read at the start of your video is something that is valuable to you. Because I remember like a lot of people got mad. I don't know why I keep bringing up AVGN. I guess I just have AVGN on the mind today. But a lot of people got mad at AVGN when he started doing ad reads. And I remember thinking to myself, he grew up in a time where like advertisements were just everywhere. Like that's the way things were in old cable. It was advertisements. In movies, it was advertisements. So for him to do advertisements on his content makes total sense to him. I don't know, like he usually tries to make his content more like the stuff he grew up with, and so ads just fit into that. And it makes sense to me when I watch his videos and I see an ad. But
Hmm.
some people just see that and immediately lose it and think the internet's supposed to be free. The internet's supposed to be free.
Yeah.
So you're just always going to have these people that don't like spending any money on the internet, and that's fine. But you got to do you. You got to do what you think is right. Whatever you think is morally good for what you do, Just do it and stick with it, and don't change your mind on it because people tell you to.
Yeah,
Just do what you think is right. That's the most important thing.
yeah, I totally agree with you. So one thing I'm curious about is I think I looked at your website and I looked at the streaming schedule and I was like, wait a minute, what? Like it's 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, what? Like I've done a few live streams. I'm not a streamer by any means. I mean, I do a few a year, like max. But even then, it's like I do like 3 or 4 hours tops, and I'm exhausted. Like, how the hell does this guy stream all the freaking time? Like, how do you even how do you do that?
I don't have a good answer for you. I started streaming January 2016, and I quickly moved to 4 days a week. And I've done 4 days a week, 9 hours a day, every week for the past 4 years.
Wow.
And I've missed maybe 2 weeks. I went on a vacation. I go on a vacation every year with my family, usually for a week, but I think last year we didn't do one for money reasons. So I think I missed like 2 weeks for vacation. I missed like a couple days here and there for important events. Other than that, I'm there. Um, I think the consistency is super duper important, and I've always felt that way. And I hate watching content creators or watching like Twitch streamers that are all over the place. I like consistency. I like being able to jump on and being like, oh, it's 2 o'clock. This guy's on and I can watch him. So when I got into it, I wanted to be consistent. I didn't care how much I streamed. I didn't care what the times were. I just wanted to be consistent. So I said, I'm doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, 8:30 to 5. That's going to be it. And I've stuck to that. I don't know how I go so long. I guess I grew up playing a lot of games, and it just comes naturally to me. And like I said, I became a lot more of an extroverted person in high school, and I kind of carried that into college. And so sitting around and talking with people for 9 hours is pretty natural to me. But I mean, it was hard at first. I definitely had to get acquainted to it. It's not like I just started doing 9 hour streams and felt perfect all the time. It was
Yeah.
hard, especially when my first son came home and he was keeping me up all night, and then I'd have to stream for 9 hours. Like, it was definitely difficult. And I still have
Yeah.
days that I get tired and I drink way too much coffee with way too much sugar in it. But yeah, I just think the consistency is important, and I love every minute of it. I really do. If I streamed 9 hours a day and three of those hours I was like struggling, then I would cut back.
Hmm.
But I love every minute of it, and my community makes it so easy for me. My community is so great that I can just talk to them about anything, and we can keep a conversation going, and it's always fun. And the easiest thing, they make it so easy because they're so welcoming.
Hmm.
When I first started, it was hard when new people would come in, and I would try to like get their attention or keep them there. Or, I mean, I didn't try super hard because I've never been about the views, but I guess when you're starting out, like I didn't care how many viewers I got. And even on YouTube, I didn't care about how many views I got on the videos. But when you start streaming, everyone knows you need someone there,
Hmm.
because if you're streaming to no one, it's really boring.
Yeah.
So when people would come in, I would like really try to be entertaining and make sure that they stayed at least for a little bit so I could talk to someone and be excited about what I was doing.
Hmm.
And that was hard, and it was really draining. And but now it's so easy. I have such a great community, and every time someone comes in, they're super welcoming to them. And I get people still coming over from YouTube all the time saying, "Oh, I saw your Final Fantasy VII tutorial," and I can be like, "Hey, what'd you think of it? Huh? Did you have any questions?" And all
Yeah.
the time, I'll jump into a Final Fantasy VII game and just help people
Mm.
with stuff that they're struggling with, or in speedrun strats and stuff like that. So there's just always something to do, and I keep events going at all times. This Fantathon event that I'm doing, the marathon of Let's Plays through every Final Fantasy,
Hmm.
genius, I must say, from me, because I will never run out of content.
Yeah.
We're at Final Fantasy V now. I'm at like five, I don't know how many episodes now, like 300 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But for the next year and a half, I never have to worry about what I'm doing on Fridays. It's always Fantathon. So if you have events like that where you can continue to do stuff and continue to come up with new ideas, it helps a lot. It makes it a lot more fun. I do events for Halloween. I do this thing called Meme Week where we play all these ridiculous meme games. Um, and just I'm always trying to keep something fun going on so that it's fun for me. I get up in the morning and I'm excited to do it. Because if I got in the morning and I got up in the morning and I was like, I have to stream for 9 hours today and I don't know what I'm going to do,
Yeah.
it would suck.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, I mean, looking at that schedule, I mean, the first thing I thought was just like, how on earth do you fill all that time all the time? Like, you know,
Hmm.
and I guess for you, it feels like it's almost, to me, a stream always feels like an event, like an event slash show. Like every time I stream, because I do it so rarely, I feel like it's got to be good. You know, people got to be engaged. I got to make sure I play well. You know, I got to make sure I don't say anything stupid or do anything stupid. I got to make sure my connection doesn't drop out. I got to make sure, I don't know, it's well moderated. I got to make sure I hit everything,
Hmm.
and I always have a really good time doing it. And you know, the viewers, they always really enjoy it. But I look at your version and I'm just like, I know myself, and I could not ever do that. And the fact that you found something that works for you in that way is awesome. And I think for you, because the stream is just so long, I think you ultimately, I feel like after a point, it, like you say, it's probably easier to have a stream that long because you can't be like quote unquote on for 9 hours every single day. That consider you're just you know, you don't,
Hmm.
no one can put on an act for that long. No one can pretend to be hype or excited or entertaining, or it's just you, man. You're just there playing your games and just like interacting with people. And you know, maybe you do silly stuff, or you just, you know, you're just chilling. Sometimes you just take a break, you tell people you're going to do something and whatever, you know. So I feel like ultimately that's probably why your supporters enjoy it in that sense as well, because they really just get to hang out with you for the whole day. It's more, it does feel more like a hangout, you know, rather than just you know, you putting on a show for these guys for 2 3 hours a day or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a hangout. And I always try to bring it up that way, like, hey, thanks for stopping by. Hey, thanks for chilling out. Like, people, I think what I really realized that what I had was special was when my regulars would start coming in and saying stuff like, hey, I had 30 seconds on my lunch break and I just wanted to come in and say hi.
Hmm.
That blew my mind the first time I heard someone say that, because
Hmm.
to me it was still a show. And I try to dress it up like, hey, we're just hanging out, but to me it is a show. I mean, it's what I do for a living, so it is a show. And for someone to come in for 30 seconds just to say hi to me, like they care enough about me to say hi. I'm no longer Bugs Bunny doing a 30-minute show. I am Mike and they're saying hi to me. And so that's when I realized it was something special. That's when I realized that, like, no, we're just friends hanging out. And sure, I do it for a living, but it's just friends hanging out and talking about whatever. And um I've seen a lot of Twitch channels that are chill, but I think mine is definitely up there as one of the most chill streams. Everyone's just relaxing. I mean, we'll go hours where chat is like super slow.
Hmm.
And then I've had people say before, like, oh man, chat's dead. And I'm like, oh, they're not dead. They're just chilling. Like, you know, like I have 100 viewers right now and there's no one chatting in the chat. It's because everyone's hanging out. Everyone's just listening and doing their own thing. And I don't force anyone to try to like keep chat active. Why would I care about that?
Hmm.
If they're watching and enjoying, what does it matter if they're typing in the chat? Um,
Exactly. And especially, I think again, especially because it's such a long show, like you just can't, there's no way that you could reasonably expect chat to be like popping for 9 hours every single
right.
day. You know, that's crazy. Like they're just not sustainable.
But
So,
that's the great part, is that on Fridays we do Fantathon, and that's everyone's time to pop off. Everyone's
yeah.
excited for Fantathon. Or I have special events. I do a Halloween event every year called Hollow Month, and we do all sorts of crazy giveaways and crazy events and stuff. And that's their time to pop off. And I think that's important if you're looking to get into something like this.
Mhm.
You got to have lows and highs. It can't always be high. It can't always be low. You got to have both. That way, when the highs hit, they're really high. You know, if you hang out on a chat for so many hours and then you have that one hype moment, it's so much cooler than if they're constantly trying to make every moment hype, because that
Yeah.
just gets, tiring at that point.
Yeah. Do you like I mentioned this on a previous podcast as well, but because of my own 24/7 stream and the community that we have there, I like, sometimes we just get like a surge in views and it goes up to like 300, 400, and the record we've had is like 424. And whenever that happens, like in my Discord, I have like my moderated team, we have our own like Discord chat, and it's just going mad in there. Like everyone's going crazy. They're posting screenshots, like, oh, this, that, and everyone's just so hype. And obviously, it's always just like crazy hype to hit like a new peak, especially after we've been 24/7 for so long. And but then like for me, always like I have the sort of reality kicks in, and I have the come down where I'm like, yeah, like this was awesome, like a great milestone. And then I think to myself, yeah, but like, what if this keeps happening and I don't have 400? Like in a year, we have 800, and then we have 1,000, and then we have 2,000, and then we have 5,000. It's like, but then I can't, we won't be able to moderate the stream. There'll just be too many people there chatting constantly all the time. And so we're going to get like an increase in spam, an increase in bots, an increase in trolls, an increase in haters. And like, even when the chat is like, even if there's good people in the chat, it's just going to flow so fast and be so hard to mod that we're just not going to be able to enjoy ourselves in there. And I'm just like, to be honest, like I love it. Like it's obviously great to see the stream doing so well, but I kind of always hope that it never blows up to that sort of level so that we can still maintain our community and just like have that great vibe and the atmosphere in there. Like, do you feel the same about your stream?
Yes and no. I've had that thought in the past, but to be honest, I think the content I make will never get to the point where it's unmoderatable.
Hmm.
Um, Having a more chill atmosphere and playing Final Fantasy VII, a game that's more retro and not, Fortnite.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think it will ever get to the point where it's so insane that I can't control it. Um, I do have I've had comments before. It's pretty rare, but I've had a couple comments. A couple people have said, a couple of my regulars have said, like, I'm afraid that one day you're going to be too popular and then we're not going to be able to interact with you.
Hmm.
And I hate when I hear that,
Yeah.
because I'm like, listen, I have watched streamers. I know I can name off several streamers that have 600 plus, 1,000 plus, 2,000 plus viewers at all times, and they interact with their chat just fine.
Hmm.
It is possible. You can do it. If you really work hard at it and you have good moderator team and you have a Discord and you personally message people that you care about and you keep events that keep your close-knit people involved, it is completely possible. I don't want any of my viewers to think like one day, as soon as I hit 1,000 viewers, I'm going to be like, all right, guys, that's it. Like, I don't care about any of you anymore.
Hmm.
It's all about just whatever chat's saying at the moment. Um, so I hate when I hear that. I hate that people get that impression. I don't blame them though. If you go and look at big Twitch streamers, usually it's like the chat is more of a flow. Like,
Yeah.
the general consensus of the chat is what they react to, not individual people.
Yeah.
But I don't want anyone to have that thought. I don't want you to have that thought either. It's 100% possible to have that many people and work at it just fine. I just started a new event on my show called CRC. It's the Community Rando Challenge.
Hmm.
And basically, what it is people buy tickets and I send them random games
Okay.
and they complete those games and then they review them on a board that we have. And
Right.
then they
Okay.
send them back and we send those games to more people.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like almost like a Secret Santa kind of thing, but with
Yeah.
games.
That's cool.
And I wanted to do that to kind of show them that, like, no matter what happens, our community has this small, um, kind of close knit community where we can do cool things like this.
Hmm.
That literally has no impact on, like, if my YouTube videos have a bunch of views, if Twitch chat, it currently has a lot of people in it. This is
Hmm.
completely separate. It's actually on my website that I do it.
Hmm. Okay.
And I make the announcement on Discord, and then the first 20 people that get in is basically who gets the tickets, and then we do it on the show.
Mm.
And no amount of YouTube views is going to like change how many tickets there are. It's still just the people that want to be involved in it. So there's all sorts of cool little things like that you can do. You can do giveaways to people that have watched the show the longest, or stuff like that. Like, there's always ways to involve people that are the most important to you in your community. When I started, I thought that I'd keep forgetting people's names.
Hmm.
Like, I remember when I started and I had like 10 viewers, I was like, oh man, if I get an 11th viewer, I'm going to start forgetting names. Like, there's no way. And nowadays, I probably have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Twitch names rolling around my head. When someone pops in, I remember
Hmm.
them immediately. And I guess it just comes with practice. It just, as you do it, you remember more and more people. Sometimes
Yeah.
come in and be like, "Oh, I haven't been here for years. You probably don't even remember me." And I'll be like, "I remember exactly who you are. Like, I remember you came in, you were talking about Mortal Kombat." They're like, "How in the world did you remember that?"
Hmm.
I guess it's just, it comes with practice. When you do it for long enough and when you take it seriously enough. Um, and that's another one of those things. If you don't put your whole heart and soul into it, that's the kind of interaction you're never going to have.
Yeah.
Um, if
100%.
you're if you're just doing stuff day by day, whereas I get up every morning and this is my job from 9 to 5. I'm doing this, so I go at it like a job, just like I would go to a if I was working at a big job, I'd get in a suit and tie and do whatever I needed to do for that job. I do the same thing for this. I do what I got to do. If I got to remember 1,000 names, then I better start learning them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to that stuff, I tend to remember teachers, and the way teachers will have thousands and thousands of students over their lifetimes, but it could be like 30 years, and that student will appear, and I'm like, hey, I'm Mike. Do you remember me? And they're like, yeah, of course I remember you. And you're like, wait, how? Like, you've had thousands of people who remember my name, who remember this. I think with that sort of stuff, people in our position, I don't know how it happens. Like you say, I think it's just we have the capacity for it, and we kind of don't realize until it starts to happen. And like over time, just like usernames start to become memorable, and then these people are just like they're surprised that you ever remembered them in the first place, and you're like, no, no, I know who you are. Like I've seen your comments, or like I've seen you in the chat, and all that kind of stuff.
It's wild what you can do when you put your whole mind into something. When you put all of your energy into something, you'll be surprised what you can do.
Yeah, for me, it sometimes even goes a step further, because ever since I started the whole stream community thing, I've started to get to know a lot more people on like a personal level as well. But I try to keep myself generally fairly accessible. So like on Instagram, people can DM me and that kind of thing. And I've gotten to make friends of like people I've met on the stream and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it's like now I start to have the problem of remembering stories. Like before, maybe I had like 10, 15 friends whose stories, quote unquote stories, I kind of knew and remembered. Like, how many brothers and sisters they have, all this kind of stuff. But now that number's like 150, 200 or something. And it's just like someone will tell me something, like when I'm messaging them, and I'm like, wait a minute, like what was this again? Like, I don't remember stuff as much as I used to. Or like something will happen, there'll be a piece of news that I share with people. So I'll share it with my family first, like in real life. Then I'll share it with like some close friends that I've known all my life. Then I want to share it with some of my like quote unquote YouTube friends. And then I'm like, wait a minute, which one did I tell? Does this person already know? And like you start getting into all these kind of loops. But like these are good problems. It's just crazy how many people there are out there that you can just interact with and share something positive with. And it's probably been the best development of like the last couple of years, just getting to know more people, listen to more stories, and the podcast as an extension of that. It's just been fascinating. I've met so many people from like so many different backgrounds and all this kind of stuff. I've really enjoyed that part of YouTube for the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, that's definitely the best part is the people.
Yeah, definitely. Let's one thing I do want to start to talk about. Of course, we've talked a bit about like the stories and all the streaming, that kind of stuff, but I want to talk a bit more about the actual Final Fantasy. Of course, the let's hear a little bit of Final Fantasy stories and views and that kind of stuff. So I want to hear, like, how did you first come across Final Fantasy VII? What was it like the first time you played it? How old were you? And all that good stuff.
So when I was growing up, I wasn't super into video games. I liked them, but they were just something to do. and my dad owned an NES, and I played like Mario and my favorite game, Ice Hockey, on NES. That game is the best. Um, and that was kind of it. And then my stepbrother, had a Genesis, and we had like Sonic on it. But that was it. And my family went through like this huge transition period at the time, and so we didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't really worry about video games of all things. So I basically just played the NES and the Genesis at. I remember I went to my cousin's house. We'd play it sometimes, but that was about it. And then one day, I don't remember how old I was, but it was around the time that the PS1 came out. My dad bought a PS1. So I skipped all the way from basically NES and then also Sonic to the PS1. And you can imagine like how crazy that was for my little brain to be like, wow, this is video games. And I still don't know why. I don't know how, but somehow he got Final Fantasy VII with that PS1. Which I like, he wasn't into RPGs or anything. He was into like, at the time he liked strategy games and stuff. But for whatever reason, he got Final Fantasy VII, and so Final Fantasy VII was one of, if not the first game I played on PS1. And so I went from Mario to Final Fantasy VII, and it completely blew my mind. I was like, this is the most crazy thing ever. Video games are awesome. I need to play these more. And so basically, Final Fantasy VII is the game that got me into video games, which is why it's still my favorite. Um, I could play many games that are better than it, and it would still be my favorite because it's the one that got me started. Um, but over the years, I've realized that Final Fantasy VII is just a game that never stops giving. And a lot of people feel the same way in my community, where even now, a couple days ago, new speedrun tech was found um, in the original. And so it just never, ever stops giving. There's always more to do in it. When I got into challenge running big time, Final Fantasy VII is like the best game, maybe the best game of all time for challenge runs, because there's so many different things you can do. Um, I would say like 7 and 10 are maybe tied for like just the amount of crazy stuff. 10 because of the sphere grid, and 7 because of just how many things are broken in 7. There's just so many options. You can take away everything but one thing in 7 and still manage yourself, because basically every single mechanic in 7 is broken in some way. So you can do it only items and you'll be fine. You can do only limit breaks and you'll be fine. So over the years, I've just found many, many different ways to play the game, and it's still fun and people still enjoy it. Um, we just recently finished my most recent challenge run of the game was 2 Final Fantasy VII's, 1 controller, no item. So I played
That
two
just
Final
sounds
Fantasy.
ridiculous.
Yeah, so I played 2 Final Fantasy VII games at the same time with 1 controller, and the 1 controller controlled the inputs of both games.
Okay.
So I was not able to, for example, if I'm in a menu and on the left game I'm on attack and on the right game I'm on magic, I cannot scroll up to like pick attack on both games. I'm pretty much forced to use magic on the right game.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of like ridiculously stupid decisions I had to make, like attacking my own party members, or running away from battles I didn't want to run away from, because there's maybe on the left screen I ran into a dragon, and on the right screen I ran into something that I really wanted to fight. Well, I got to run away from both, because if I don't, left side's going to get wrecked by the dragon. So there was like, it was such a unique experience, because in every Final Fantasy VII challenge I've ever done, I can at least do what I want to do, even if it's the wrong answer.
Hmm.
Like, oh, I can use fire on this enemy. Sure, maybe it won't work, but hey, at least I can do it. But in this challenge, I had to make so many decisions I didn't want to make.
Hmm.
And it made for a very unique challenge. So that was an absolute blast. And we're always coming up with new ridiculous challenges for the game. And somehow, some way, getting to the end of the game. So it's always been a blast going through 7. And then there's also like the lore videos and stuff, which people are always interested in, because 7 has just this huge, vast lore that Square continues to expand on. So there's always stuff to talk about.
Hmm.
Um, and then, of course, the remake, which also spurred everyone to start talking about 7 again.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna get to the remake as well. But I definitely agree that I guess as much of a Final Fantasy X guy as I am, I do have to look at like the history of the franchise, and I don't think any game has given more than Final Fantasy VII has. Like when you consider everything, and the legacy, and the replayability, the challenge, the modding, and all of that kind of stuff. I definitely think you're right that Final Fantasy VII is that game, and it's fortunate for you that you came in at the time when Final Fantasy VII was Final Fantasy VII was your first one. For me, it definitely took me a longer time to be able to play Seven because I started in the PS2 era with Final Fantasy X. So for me, there was always that barrier of feeling like I was always just going to take a step back. There was absolutely no way a game that was made before Final Fantasy X with no voice acting from like an older gen console, there's absolutely no way that game could be anywhere near as good. And especially when you're like in your mid-teens, you just have no motivation to even bother with a game like Final Fantasy VII. I didn't anyway. And it wasn't until I sort of started to, mature a bit, and the YouTube channel definitely helped because I already made Final Fantasy X content. And I was like, well, I guess it's time to start trying out these other Final Fantasies and see what they have to offer. And obviously, it was a great decision because I started to go back in time. Like I started with Final Fantasy IX as my first PS1 era Final Fantasy, and I've been going back ever since. So I'm playing them backwards in that sense, which has been weird. Like since Final Fantasy IX, I've just been going back, and I just finished Final Fantasy VI as well. So Final Fantasy V is coming up next for me too. But the first time I finished Final Fantasy VII, I remember thinking it's hard because as someone who's never played Final Fantasy VII before, but that's in the community, Final Fantasy VII community is so intense, and obviously you know better than anyone like how intense Final Fantasy VII's community can
Yeah, I
be,
do.
and there's obviously like that's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, of course, it's huge, it's so passionate and all that stuff, but there is of course like an element of it that just they refuse to accept any criticism about the game. It feels a bit toxic at times in some pockets of the community and that kind of thing. And you always wonder, like, is it really like, come on, like, surely this game's a bit overhyped. It can't be that great. And then you play it, and I just remember saying, like, in the final episode, I definitely made a point to say that, in my opinion, like, with my most objective hat on, I do think it's the greatest Final Fantasy ever made. And does that mean that it's necessarily the best Final Fantasy ever made? Like, no, I think 10's the best Final Fantasy ever made. But I have to just acknowledge the greatness of 7. And, it just, to me, it always did so many things very well. And of course, there's things that it didn't do so well, but I think for a lot of the major points, like the characters, let's say, characters are always a huge part of any Final Fantasy experience. It had great characters, the villain's always an important element. Villain was one of the most iconic. The gameplay I always thought was good, like the bout system, the materia system, the limit breaks, and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was all good. The soundtrack for me is one of the most iconic soundtracks. And already, like when you put together some of the most major elements for what makes the Final Fantasy game good, in my opinion, Final Fantasy VII is probably like top three for almost all of them. So, like in that respect, I definitely loved Seven, and I think when it's all said and done, it's probably my second favorite Final Fantasy. I struggle anything after 10. I struggle to rank, but with Seven, I think like the more time goes by and the more I think about it, Final Fantasy VII Remake, seeing that as well, like Seven, just like in general as a whole thing, I got to put it second behind Final Fantasy X in terms of my own personal favorite Final Fantasies. But to flip it back to you, I remember when we first talked about this, you even like when you were talking about it now, you said it might not be the best, but it's my favorite, and you talk about like its flaws, like it has very obvious flaws and that kind of thing. So in your opinion, what's some of the biggest flaws of Final Fantasy VII, even though you love it so much?
Well, one of my issues with Seven is that like game glitches. I've grown up, like we talked about before, have been a very important part of my gaming experience, and a big part of my channel as well. And glitches are awesome, especially for like speed running and stuff. But where you draw the line is where casually you run into glitches that ruin the experience. Um, if you can force a glitch and it's really cool and awesome, then that's great. But if you're playing through the game casually, not trying to do any kind of glitch, and you run into one, it's frustrating. And that's where Seven kind of drops the ball. Seven was rushed out of development at the end, and the coding mechanisms they used for Seven are beyond bizarre. There was no engine that they used to, it's not like today where you just pop into Unreal Engine and you're good to go. They made their own coding design for it. And basically, the way it works is it's like a giant HTML document where everything is this or this. Like this happens, and then once you hit this number, then this happens, or it's a if then statement where if this happens, then this happens, and if this doesn't happen, then skip to this. Um, and because of that, there's just all sorts of ridiculous things that are broken in the game. Um, as you've probably seen before with all of my videos about glitches and stuff, and then the PC speedrun now being under an hour and a half.
Yeah. So
Um,
what are some of like the greatest hits in terms of these glitches then for people that aren't as familiar with them?
oh well, currently the new game plus playthrough, which I guess I have to explain that because it's not obvious. There's two speedrun categories in Final Fantasy VII. There's more, but the two main ones are PC any percent and PC New Game Plus. PC any percent is just beat the game, right?
Hmm.
Um, PC New Game Plus allows you to have saves on the game. You still have to start at the beginning and get that save to the end, but you're allowed to have other saves on the memory card or because it's a PC in the files in order to use them for specific glitches. But that's it. You still have to get your main file to the end of the game.
Okay.
Um, and probably the greatest glitch I've ever found in the game. I was the one that found it. It was last year that I found it. It's called materia smuggling, and the way it works is you take any save in the game you want and you load it, and you can point to any materia you want and put it in a specific spot in your inventory, and then you load up another save and you can take that materia and put it in your second save.
Whoa.
So, long story short, as soon as you get the materia menu at the very beginning of the game in Seventh Heaven, you could take your final save that has Knights of the Round and every master materia and just plop it all into your new game.
Damn, that's
Um,
wild.
yeah, and it's not a Game Shark code. It's not anything like that. It is just the game doing that.
Is that
Um,
is that PC version specific? Would that have happened on like a PS1?
So it does work on PS1, but not in the same way. You
Okay.
can't take Knights of the Round and put it in your inventory on PS1. But the same glitch works, and basically, you can have a materia little like alcove where you can put materia in it and it disappears and then it reappears later in the game. It's kind of hard to explain without
Mm,
going into it.
sure.
But probably the goofiest thing you can do is you can smuggle materia into the Yuffie side quest, which is
Right.
hilarious because the whole point of the Yuffie side quest is to not have materia.
Yeah.
But even on the original, you can hide some materia in this special spot in the menu, and then Yuffie steals all your materia, and then you can get that materia back and use it in the quest, which is hilarious. But that was the big find that we found last year. But there's so many other. I mean, I could just go on and on and on about all the ridiculous things we found over the years. But the
What
reason,
about what about the more casual ones that you mentioned? So someone that like
yeah,
doesn't know anything about it, what kind of stuff could they run into?
right. So like the biggest thing I would say is the save crystal glitch. A lot of people know about that. Where in the final dungeon, if you put the save crystal in a weird spot, sometimes it glitches the game and you can't leave.
Yeah.
Um, it caused a lot of issues back in the day where people would go on forums and say, I really wish you could leave the final dungeon and like do other things. Once you go to the final dungeon, you're stuck down there. And then other people would come on and go, what are you talking about? You can leave the dungeon. And then they say, no, I'm trying to leave and I can't leave. And so there'd be like all these arguments and stuff. And it was all because of this glitch that no one knew was really a thing until later. And we still don't know exactly what makes it happen.
Hmm.
Um, but that glitch really sucks, and it happened to a lot of people. I think it happened to me when I was a kid because I remember having a file where I couldn't leave, um, and that kind of ruins the experience a bit. And that's just due to them having a really weird coding mechanism for the game. Also, the W item glitch, where you can multiply any item you want. If you figure that out casually, it kind of completely ruins the game because the game becomes free. You can have 99 of whatever you want.
Hmm.
And I think I remember figuring that out as a kid as well. It's pretty easy to figure out if you just accidentally fiddle around with the menus with W item, you can accidentally get it to happen.
Yeah.
Um, there are some other issues with the game, some of which aren't as important. Like it struggles a lot with cutscenes if the disc is scratched,
Mm.
and a lot of Final Fantasy VII discs are scratched.
Hmm.
Um, so that's an issue. And then there's small things too. I just think that Final Fantasy VII is such a legendary game, but it does have flaws that keep me from just being like it's automatically the best game. Like it's automatically the best Final Fantasy. You can't even compare it to the other ones. It's the best one.
Hmm.
I just think that's a bit of an exaggeration. If you gave me an argument as to why Final Fantasy VII was the best, I'd definitely listen to it. And I've gone back and forth on whether or not I think it's the best.
Hmm.
Um, one thing that I think Seven has going for it is the pacing.
Hmm.
I think it's the best paced game in the series. It's never boring. It is just always action. Things are always happening. The beginning is so action packed, and then you're on this quest to find Sephiroth, and everything makes sense, and everything you do is for a purpose. Um, some Final Fantasy games, especially the earlier ones, there's a lot of MacGuffins and just running around to get this and running around to get that, and all of it kind
Hmm.
of eventually leads to, oh crap, someone's trying to destroy the universe.
Yeah.
But there's not much rhyme or reason up to that point. Whereas Final Fantasy VII just does such a great job of interweaving the story so that it all makes sense in the end. Um, Cloud's journey makes sense throughout the whole thing. There's never a time where you're just like, okay, what's Cloud doing? Um, Between like the Aerith scene in the middle and then the live stream later, it all fits, and it all like from the moment you meet Cloud, he has this identity crisis, and the identity crisis isn't fixed until the moment before the final boss. So you have that story going the whole time. Whereas some of the other Final Fantasies, I like to point at Final Fantasy VIII as an example, where the main issue when you start the game, the main kind of antagonist protagonist conflict, is
Hmm.
solved on the first disc. And
Mm.
then the rest of the game is just kind of like, okay, well, now there's this evil witch that we have to stop. And that has nothing to do with the beginning of the game, you know?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
they just kind of string you along at some point. The old ones do it a lot, like Final Fantasy 3 and 2. They kind of just like, oh, you got to go get these crystals, and the crystals are going to save the universe. And then at some point, there's a villain, and at some point, he strings you along to the point where you're like, okay, now we got to defeat him. Um, but Seven does such a great job of interweaving everything, where everything's always important all the time.
Yeah.
The interactions between Cloud and Tifa, the interactions between Cloud and Aerith, the interactions between Sephiroth and what he's doing, it's always important all the time. The pacing is so good that you never want to put the controller down. So that's what I think Seven has over all the other ones.
Yeah. I think I can definitely agree with that one. I think another game other than seven, six has always stood out to me as having good pacing as well. I never felt bored playing six either. I always
You
thought they
can't you
did a good
can't you
job.
can't spoil six for me. It's the only one I haven't played, believe it or not.
That's interesting. Okay, fair enough. That.
Believe it or not, I haven't played six because when I started this Fantathon thing, um, I decided that I didn't want to play six until I could play it with my community.
Okay.
So I held off on playing it, even though I know it's one of, if not the best in the series. Most people, they either stick to seven or six
Yeah.
as being the best. And when I realized that six was so good, I decided I don't want to play it alone. I want to play with my community. So then I started the Fantathon thing. And once we get there, we'll get there, and I get to experience it for the first time with the community. So
Ah.
um, I'm really excited for that. It's going to be awesome. And I can't wait to see what everyone says about six. I know that Kefka is a big part of it. I know that he's like an amazing villain.
Yeah.
But other than that, I really don't know what makes six so great other than the soundtrack.
Yeah.
Um, so so I can't wait to get into it and see like what everyone says about it. And who knows, maybe I'll be back on this podcast next time and I'll be like, listen, seven, it blows. It's all about six. We're gonna talk about six. It's gonna let's
Yeah.
talk about why six is the best. So
Yeah, I can definitely throw in a vote for six being one of the best. For you're basically where I was like last year, where I've been in the community a long time, but I've never played six. And over time, six is that game that when you talk to Final Fantasy fans who have genuinely played through like pretty much every game, six is always like so well respected and so well loved. And I was like, surely this has got to be good. All of these people, they can't be wrong. and so I did have quite high expectations for it, and it definitely delivered on almost all counts for me. So I'm pretty sure you're gonna definitely enjoy six,
Yeah,
and
I
we'll
mean,
definitely
I'm
talk we'll definitely talk about it once you're done. How has five been for you? So I haven't played one to five for the record because I'm continuing to go backwards, and so five is going to be the next one I played. What do you think of five so far with no spoilers?
I am shocked by how good five is actually.
Really? Okay.
Because no one ever talks about five. Like five
Yeah.
seems to be the one that everyone's just kind of like, oh yeah, five. But I am loving five. Like I am falling in love with it. I think it's going to be one of my favorites when I'm done with it.
Wow.
It's just such a great character development game. The characters are so awesome, and I played one through four up to five. So for you, you're going backwards, so it might not hit you the same way. But for me, one through four had good characters, but not great characters. Especially one and two were like, and then three, really, I hated the characters in three. And then four had pretty good characters. So I'm like, okay, we're starting to get to the point where characters are starting to matter a bit more, and they're starting to really focus on the characters a bit more. Five is when they really hit their stride. Five is the first game that they were like, the characters are what matters. There's a ton of interactions with the characters. They're funny, they're witty, they have different personalities, they change, they have development throughout the game. So I think five is when they finally hit their stride. They realized what Final Fantasy was all about, because they were kind of experimenting a lot with one through four. Four started to get there, but still wasn't perfect yet. Five is my honestly when I think they really five is like the first true Final Fantasy going forward, where they knew what they wanted to do, they knew what the characters should be, they knew that the characters were important and the stories mattered more than just the gameplay. So I think you'll love five, knowing that you started with 10 and knowing what you like about the games.
Hmm.
I think you'll enjoy five, and five is the first like super memorable story driven adventure in the series for me. So
Okay. For me so far, the feedback that I've gotten has always been of that era. Like four and six are the ones I always hear about. With
yep,
six slightly even more so, but four I hear about a lot. And like you say, five is kind of like that forgotten child, like that middle child of four and six,
yep.
where it's just like I've definitely come across people that have love for five, but I've definitely seen some people who are like, I'm not really sure if you'll enjoy five, or I didn't particularly enjoy five. So my expectations are lower than they were for six, which I think is a good thing. I always try to keep expectations in check, like as much as I can. So if it does end up being like you say, I'll be like all the more happy for it. But um, I mean, like, what about the job system? That I haven't played a Final Fantasy with a job system since 12 in 2017, so it's been a while.
Oh well, five's job system is really cool, because you can combine in five. So in five, you can have a they man. It kind of reminds me of nine a bit, where like characters can get abilities permanently. But the way they did it in five is you get a thief, and while he's a thief, he learns thief abilities, and then at any time you can switch him to something else, and he'll keep his thief abilities.
Right.
But you only get to pick one. So like for example, I just had a what did I have? I had a ninja, I think, with a special ability that I wanted. So I kept the ninja until I learned that ability permanently, and then I switched the ninja to something else. And now I have that something else with that ability. Early on, I picked a white mage and I learned up to like white magic 3 or something. And then I switched them to a black mage. So now I have a black mage that can heal.
Yeah, it makes
Um,
sense.
and so that's basically the way they did it. So there's just like a ton of different classes, and you just pick one class, and then you get one ability from all the abilities you permanently learned. And I thought that was really, I mean, it's really unique. I don't really know any other RPGs in general, let alone Final Fantasy, that does it that way. So it really sticks out to me as different and unique, which again makes me wonder why so many people forget about five because it feels so unique and different.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, maybe it's just me. Maybe I just love five and more than everyone else. I guess we'll see. Maybe I'll play six and completely forget five exists. I think that maybe that's part of the problem is everyone played five and then six, and then they're like, "What's a Final Fantasy five?" I all I know is six. That's the only game I've ever played, and it's the only game I'll ever play for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
So
there's
maybe
there's
that's the
definitely
problem.
there's definitely like the whole bias thing, and I find with Final Fantasy there's always a recency bias, like
Yeah.
the one that you played the most recent. If it's one of the good ones anyway, once you finish it, you're always like, yeah, like this is my favorite Final Fantasy, or this is like definitely my second favorite Final Fantasy. Then you play the next one, and you're like, nah, this is my favorite Final Fantasy now, actually. And then a few years passes, and you look back on all of them, and then you struggle to decide which one really was your favorite out of them.
Yeah, see, I agree with that, but also the one you've played the most recently is your second favorite, and then the one you played first is your first favorite. That seems to be the way it goes.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if your first one, I think if your first one was like 6, 7, 9, or 10, I think like those four games are probably the ones where like if you play that one first, that tends to always remain your favorite. I think that's the opinion I have on that.
Yeah. Shade on the Final Fantasy VIII community. You heard it here first. He hates all
Well,
the Final Fantasy VIII fans out there. No, Final Fantasy VIII is the Final Fantasy for non-Final Fantasy fans. That's what I've found.
hmm.
If you hate all the other ones, you love VIII. That tends to be
Possibly, like it really is a dark sheep among Final Fantasy games. I mean, anyone that's listening to this and that's watched my 8 playthrough, they know I got a lot of love for 8. But community-wise, it's definitely a lot more divided. I think for me, there was something about 8 that just there were a lot of great moments in 8 that really grabbed me. I think I really like even
yeah.
the space section, the bit that takes part in outer space. Like I've always had a fascination with like space and space travel and all that kind of stuff. That bit really grabbed me. Like that was just iconic for me. Like it was unforgettable. And maybe I related to school a bit more than like normal people do, like other people do. I don't know. But 8 for me was always cool. I did enjoy it, and I think it was one of those where when I finished it, like the soundtrack for me blew my mind. I still think it might be, again, if I'm trying to be super objective, I think for my own taste, it's very close to Final Fantasy X soundtrack for me. It's either like equal footing or like
Just say it's
slightly
the
below.
best. Just say it.
I
You know you want to say
I
it. Just
can't
say
I
it.
can't I can't do it, man. I
I
can't do it.
love Final Fantasy VIII soundtrack. It's so hard for me to put anyone like the other day I had like an argument with my chat because they were saying like, okay, well, 8 soundtrack is good, but like, come on, you can't beat 7. Like it's just the legendary soundtrack, right? And like you
Yeah.
can't beat 10 because 10 is also legendary. So like 8's a third. And I'm like, listen, I'm gonna change all of your guys' minds right now. And so I started going through all the 8 songs and I was like,
Yeah.
okay, listen, you got to listen to this song. It's a banger. And then they're like, okay, yeah, everyone knows Man with the Machine Gun is a banger. Okay. I
Hmm.
was like, okay, well, now listen to this one. And we went through this whole like the whole soundtrack, and just every song is so good. It's just like, sure, 7 has amazing songs. Sure, 10 has amazing songs, but 8's entire soundtrack is incredible. Every song is a banger.
I agree.
And every time my chat was like, okay, you don't have any more bangers left. Like, that's it. You played Man with the Machine Gun. You played I Might Be a Lion. Like, there's no other ones. There's no other bangers. And then I just hit him with another banger. And they'd be like, okay, listen, that's it. There can't be any more. And then I hit him with another one. And it just kept going. And eventually I had like half my chat deciding, okay, you know what? 8's the best. So
Yeah.
I'll make the argument for you. 8's up there. Maybe it's not the best, but if you want to put it tied with your favorite, it's worthy. It's so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I think putting it tied with 10 is basically me saying it's probably the best.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And I feel the same way about 7 because I mean, 7's just too nostalgic for me. I can't like put any soundtracks higher. And also, I like how 7 tells the story of the game.
Hmm.
You can listen to 7 soundtrack and get the gist of the story without even playing the game. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
The
right.
world map theme or the main theme almost tells the story. It's like it has all these dark undertones and all the songs that make you feel like the game has this dark undertone, and it just fits the game so perfectly well. I think of all the games I've ever played, it is so fitting of that game. It was just perfectly made.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think 8's problem is the same as 5's, whereas 6 came after 5, and then everyone forgot 5 existed. Well, 8 had to follow 7,
Hmm.
and that was impossible. So
Yeah.
instead, they tried to make it really different,
Hmm.
and it worked. It's different, and people like it for the fact that it's different, but it just can't really stand on its own sometimes, and it's also incredibly broken
Yes.
if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's and I my one thing about 8 that I always go back to is the monster scaling. I don't know why they did
Yeah.
it that way, and I hate it, and I'm glad they never did it again because
Agreed.
I don't understand the thought process. The point of RPGs is to get stronger. The point of RPGs is to start off as the kid on the farm with the stick,
Mm-hmm.
and you beat up little slimes, and then as you get stronger, eventually you're this big warrior with a sword, and you go back to your farm and you look at those little slimes and you basically like wink at them and they explode, and you get this
Yeah.
feeling that you've gotten stronger. That's the whole role playing aspect. That's why people role play, is so they
Mm-hmm.
can be someone that they're not. That's the whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
And with 8, you play the whole game trying to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and then you go back to the first area and everything has 7 million health because you're level 99. And it's
Yeah.
like, what is the point of that? You feel weak almost throughout the whole game unless you do the broken things with junctioning. Then it just feels unfair. So it's so weirdly balanced.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. It's got to be like for me that as much as I love Final Fantasy VIII, it's why I could never, in good faith, put it on the same level as 7. Like if I'm really thinking about it, and probably 6, I would say. So like that side of it, it's broken. It's imbalanced in ways that really just like it's so hard to find a way to enjoy the gameplay of that game, if that makes sense. Like I know there's of course people that have, but like you say, like on the one hand you got the level scaling, and then you could argue that how easily you could break the game might be a bit of a counterbalance to that. But then no one ever kind of breaks it a little bit. Once you discover how to break it, you break it,
Yep, yep.
and then well that breaks it. So it's just like, well, where do you find like the middle ground? So I do. That's why 8 for me. I loved the visual style and the FMVs of 8. I thought it was brilliant. That's why, like for me, I think along with 6, Final Fantasy 8 is the one I'd love to see remade the most. I think it would look amazing.
Oh, well, they did remake it. Don't you remember the Final Fantasy VIII quote remastered unquote? You didn't play that? Dude, that
Yeah,
you got to get in there. That is amazing. You're gonna love it. It's so
yeah,
good.
yeah. That's got to be one of the laziest remaster things called a remaster I think I've ever seen. I was really not happy with that, I've got to say.
Why is Final Fantasy VII Steam not called Final Fantasy VII Remastered? That's what I want to know.
Good
Because
question.
it's the same thing. I mean, they didn't cover up Shiva in 7, but other than that, it's better graphics and a Steam user face and interface, and that's it. Like, might as well call it remastered because that's what 8 was.
Yeah, it was just as much of a remaster as 8 was, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, it went from becoming something you sort of expect for the fact that it exists on like a much, much more powerful and modern platform now. It should just be like par for the course that they've made it look a little bit better kind of thing. But for some reason for 8, they decided to brand it as like this big new like remaster thing. That was a farce. I definitely didn't appreciate that at all.
Yeah, no.
That was bad. Okay, so we were talking about like balancing and that kind of stuff, and I've always thought like Final Fantasy VIII is one of the games that would benefit from a mod the most, like someone that could go in there and really fix this shit to give us a much much better balanced and kind of as it should have been sort of experience. Have you ever played any mods for 8? Have you seen any?
There's that one mod, crud, I forget the name. It's the most popular Final Fantasy VIII mod. Um, that basically goes in and fixes a bunch of stuff and makes the menus better and makes junctioning make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I believe the creator of the Final Fantasy VII New Threat mod, Sega Chief, he also worked on a kind of new thready type deal for 8.
Hmm.
And I don't remember if he ever completed it or not. But yeah, I've heard of some mods for 8. It's not super popular, but they do exist. And I think with 8, the big thing is like the challenge community is pretty big with 8 because it's very
Hmm.
easy to do challenges for 8. You just say, oh, we can't junction this, can't junction that, and it
Hmm.
completely changes the gameplay for the whole game.
Hmm.
So it's a good one to challenge run as well. But in terms of mods, I know there were a couple that were super popular, but other than that, I don't think it's reached the heights that like 7 has.
Yeah. So when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, I feel like if I ever do play 7 again, like the original PS1 version, I'd probably play like a mod just to see what it's like. And everyone always tells me the new threat mod is like the daddy of all Final Fantasy mods. So what can you tell me about a new threat?
Oh, New Thread is awesome. It's a great mod. I recommend it. It's um, basically Sega Chief took the game and made it new, but still with the heart of the original. And that's how he described it to me when I asked him. We made a mod site where people can download mods for 7, And when I created the new threat page, I asked him like, "What's a good description of it?" Because it's actually pretty wild. Like, there's so much you added into the game, and he just said like, it's a new way to play the game, but it still has the core identity of the game. So it has like everything you could possibly imagine. But I think the best selling point I can give you for New Threat is he added, basically, when people ask me if you could go back in time and tell Square to add one thing to Final Fantasy VII, what would it be? I always tell them I would change the characters, not their lore, but how they work in combat.
Hmm.
Um, the one, the biggest issue I have with Final Fantasy VII in terms of its mechanics are the characters are too similar. The earlier games had classes where a warrior had high strength but low magic and maybe high defense, and mages were completely useless but could use magic. Um, Final Fantasy VII doesn't have that. Everyone is very, very similar. Um, for example, Barrett, his health, his HP number isn't very much higher than Aerith's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And throughout the game, you basically realize that materia is all that matters.
Yeah.
You can take Barrett, who has I believe, the lowest magic stat in the game, and if you give him some materia, he will then have the highest magic stat. You can take Aerith, who has the lowest HP stat, and give her 1 HP plus materia, and she's good to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more about how you build the characters, and they don't really have their own identities. The only identity they have in combat is their limits, which again aren't super different. Red 13 has a couple cool ones like Lunatic High and stuff, but for the most part, they all just deal damage. Um, Clouds deals damage, Barrett's deal damage, Tifa deals damage. They just kind of do damage. Aerith probably has the coolest ones,
Yeah.
but you can't use them for very long. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like they don't really have their own identities in battle. When people ask me, what's your go-to 3 characters? I'm like, which ones do you like the look of the most? Because
Yeah.
really, they're not that different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then they also have their ultimate weapons, but that's post-game stuff. And in terms of the casual playthrough, it really does not matter which 3 characters you pick, or even 2 characters, because you really just have to have Cloud for most of the
Mm-hmm.
game.
Yeah.
So Sega Chief added this implementation into the game where their stats are pretty different. They're still not like a dedicated mage. Like, he didn't make Red 13 a dedicated mage or anything. But they have these innate abilities that are really cool and really work on what their character is supposed to be. For example, Yuffie's innate ability, I think he changed it since I played the mod, but when I played the mod, it was this. She got like super speed
Mm-hmm.
that went along with like her ninja thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then Barrett, I loved Barrett's innate ability was, if he was in the back row, he gained defense every turn up to like 5 stacks. And
Oh,
then if he was
okay.
in the front row, he gained attack stacks up to like 5 stacks. So you get more and more
Mm.
strong. So it really played with him actually being like a tank bruiser type class.
Nice.
Um, and he did that for all the characters, and they all have completely unique, different innate abilities. And there's actually reasons why you would go into a fight and think, I want Barrett for this fight because his innate ability will help for this phase of the fight or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just something that never comes up in Final Fantasy VII casually. So he really added stuff that adds to the Final Fantasy VII experience without taking away anything. If you made Red 13 a dedicated mage, it would take away you attacking with Red 13 in the original game.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't do that. He only added. He didn't subtract.
Okay.
So that's probably the best selling point I can give you, is that he kind of added stuff that makes the game a lot more interesting to play casually without getting rid of the core values of the game.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good because again, it's the kind of thing that you're gonna play having already played the original game, and I guess for me the best sort of mod in that sense is going to be the one that allows you to experience the magic of the original while adding like a fresh take on it and like a different, maybe sometimes better way to experience it. So
Yeah, I
definitely
would
sounds
still
good.
recommend not playing it before playing the original game.
Hmm.
There are some mods that I would say, like, yeah, go ahead. I have a mod that I made with a community member called the Definitive mod,
Okay.
and it just does a bunch of quality of life stuff. It lets you skip cutscenes. It lets
Ah,
you
right. Okay.
do stuff like that, and that one would be okay for like your first playthrough.
Hmm.
But New Threat's a bit too out there. Like, I would play the game first and then play New Threat.
Mm.
But it does feel like a new experience. It feels like you're playing the original, but it's like brand new, and there's so much more to do. And he added a bunch of post game as well, and
Mm.
so it's a great mod. I recommend it.
Are there any visual enhancements, or is it purely like mechanics and gameplay related?
New Threat, no, but I believe New Threat works with any visual mods that you want to do. There's a bunch of visual mods out there,
Hmm.
and I believe you can combine them. There's this thing called the Seventh Heaven
Yeah.
mod package that you can use to
Hmm.
combine mods, and I believe New Threat works with most any visual mod.
Okay, cool. It's yeah. I mean, I'm trying to remember now. I think my first full playthrough of Final Fantasy VII was actually a modded playthrough, in the sense that you've probably seen them on the channel. But I used to do movie versions of video games,
Yeah.
and I wanted to do one for Final Fantasy VII because a few of the ones I'd done for like the more recent Final Fantasies were successful, and I was like, well, seven's kind of iconic. You got to try. And so I thought at that time I was always, because I hadn't played the game before, I didn't really know like the soul and the philosophy and like the era of Final Fantasy VII, that kind of thing. The only thing on my mind was, well, if I'm going to make a movie version for it, this is something visual, so I want the game to look as good as possible. Like, what are some mods to make the game look a bit better? And obviously, I did some research and I found out about this like Seventh Heaven thing and like this Tifa's package mod or something. And
Hmm.
I put it all together and I tried to create a movie version for it. So it's weird. That was actually my first playthrough of the game as well, which was a bit odd because obviously I played through it with the intention of creating a movie version. So I did so many things. I used some hacks and I did things like differently to how I would normally do playing through. So it was a weird kind of first experience, but it didn't detract from like the first time I played it properly. At least I had a generally like better idea of the story because I played it once already and that kind of thing. But it's weird that I kind of experienced seven that way the first time.
Yeah.
So I think the final like chapter of this particular conversation, let's of course talk a little bit about Final Fantasy VII Remake. As you are the Final Fantasy VII guy, I'm sure a lot of people are curious about your thoughts and opinions on Seven Remake.
Oh well. The my opinion on the remake in general, I loved it.
Hmm.
Um, I made a video just kind of like my full review of the remake, and for the most part, I just talked about like really enjoying the experience of playing it. Um, there's things you can look at as just it as a video game, like the aerial combat didn't work too well, and there's certain things
Hmm.
that I could point at. But as an experience in general, I loved it. Um, the remake is an interesting story for me because being the Final Fantasy VII guy, I heard so many opinions about the remake before, during, and after that it's hard to even come up with my own conclusions because,
Mm,
um, I mean, the issue with the remake is that they announced it too early, as they do everything.
yeah.
But for those of you that don't know, the remake was actually an idea way back in 2000, um,
Wow.
when Final Fantasy X was first released. Um, they they had some, I don't know what it was back then because it was 2000. It wasn't like a Twitter post or anything, but some news story came out where Square was thinking about doing a remake of 7, 8, and 9 on PS2.
Mm,
And they quickly said, never mind, that would take way too long. We'd rather just make Final Fantasy 11. But it kind of planted the seed into the minds of the fans where they thought like, oh man, a 7 remake would be really cool. And then there was the infamous, I think it was like 2004 or whatever, when they came out and they said, we're doing it, never mind. So then that really like fired up the fans, like thinking that maybe one day there could be a Final Fantasy 7 remake. um, and then they had the official announcement where they had the trailer and showed the long promise is finally being fulfilled. Final Fantasy VII remake coming soon, and then they said nothing for however many years, 4 years, 5 years, and that's the worst thing you can do because over those 5 years, the expectations for the remake got so high
hmm.
that I can't even begin to describe to you the comments I would get on some of my videos. People are asking me stuff like, Death, do you think the debut item glitch is going to be in the remake? And I'm thinking, you are on a different planet, my man. Like, it is, you are not in the same realm of understanding. You need to tone it down because, first of all, don't even know if debut item is going to be in the game. Second of
Mm,
all, don't even know if materia is going to be in the game. I mean, I'm sure it probably will be, but who knows? Like, all we know is that it's been announced.
yeah.
It's obviously a different engine. It's definitely, it's not, we don't even know if it's turn based. Okay.
Mm.
So, no, debut item glitch ain't going to be in it. I would get comments like, oh, what? How are they going to do this? How are they going to do that? And I'm like, listen, I don't even know if that's going to even be in the game, right?
Mhm.
Like, let's just get to the point where we even know what's in the game. And the expectations just kept growing and growing and growing, and people are saying, oh, are they going to put the entire plot in the game? And I'm thinking, no, who's going to voice act all that?
Mhm.
Uh, and it just kept growing and kept growing, and it got to the point where it got toxic. Like, I would get comments of people saying like, if this and this aren't in the remake, I'm not buying it, I'm not supporting it. I have everyone got this checklist. It was everyone had a checklist of what they needed in the remake. And Square did their best to try to like tell us, hey, it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. It's going to be our own spin on it. And by their best, I mean they posted that like one time on one place and then never say anything again. So they could have definitely tried to tell us a bit more about it beforehand, but that's what
Mhm.
happens when you take that long to make a game and you focus on Kingdom Hearts and other series. By the time you finally get to it, people's expectations are so high that it's doomed to fail.
Yeah.
Um, so I know so many people that didn't even buy it, still haven't bought it, still haven't played it. Still comment on my remake videos saying I can't believe anyone even enjoys this crap. It's not the Final Fantasy VII I grew up with. And I'll admit, I was in that camp at one point when we were in the middle of the years where Square just said nothing about it.
Mhm.
I started to get pretty negative about it. I started to feel like, they're not going to make it the way that we want it. They're going to make their own cash cow out of it and whatever. But I remember when the demo came out, it really changed my mind a lot because they really tried to emphasize that it was this new Final Fantasy VII experience. They did not want to overwrite the old Final Fantasy VII. What they wanted to do was tell it in a way that we could play it and still enjoy it.
Mhm.
Um, and I started to really change my mindset. I changed my mindset from I want it to have this, and this to I want it to have different things so that I can experience Final Fantasy VII for the first time again.
Mhm.
Um, if the remake had just been a regurgitation of the old plot and a regurgitation of all the fights and a regurgitation of all the mechanics, and literally it was just the same as that game but with HD graphics, I would have played it once and never played it again because why would I? I can go play the original. But because the remake is so different, it gave me the opportunity to experience new things. Gave me the experience to see Cloud and Aerith talk about something they've never talked about, or a scene with Cloud and Barrett talking outside of Marlene's house, like or not Marlene's house,
Aerith's house.
Aerith's
Yeah.
house. These scenes that had never happened in the original that we get to see now, and they're different, and I get to be shocked by things.
Mhm.
I was shocked by the way they did the president, Shinra
Yeah.
president at the end.
Yeah.
I had to actually be shocked about something in Final Fantasy VII, and that's when I really changed my mindset because sure, it could have just been a regurgitation of everything, but then I wouldn't have been shocked by anything. I wouldn't have really been. I would have just been like, "Oh man, look at those graphics," and then that would have been it.
Mhm.
Instead, I got to really experience Final Fantasy VII again. I got to be shocked and, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And I got to go into that final chapter thinking, holy cow, like what's going to happen? And sure, looking back on it now, there's a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of things that I'm unsure about. And I don't really know how the fate thing is going to work out. I don't really like the fate thing too much.
Yeah.
But when I played it, I loved it. When I played it, I was into it. I was enthralled. I thought it was awesome. I was surprised. I was excited. So I can't say it's a bad game because I loved it playing it.
Mhm.
Um, like I said, looking back on it now, there's things that I can point at and be like, wow, they didn't really have to do that. But I still think it was a good experience. And a lot of people seem to agree with me that it was fun and good and they did a good job and it was a well-made video game, which, listen, right now, if I get a game that's $60 and actually keeps 40 hours of my time, I'm happy. Okay. Because I hate where gaming is right now, to be
Hmm.
honest. I talk about it all the time. I kind of hate where I bought so many video games in the past couple months that I just like, why is this $60? So the fact that they really did, I mean, they pushed it back. They pushed it back and said, we're going to make it right. And they did. They made it right. To this day, I think it's still only patch 1.01. They patched it once and they fixed like one little thing. But that's it. No
except
DLC.
except for the door texture.
Yeah. And the I don't know if they ever fixed the soft lock in the Shinra HQ either.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know if the patch fixed that or not. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a game that needed a day one patch to fix everything. It wasn't
True.
microtransaction Fiesta. It wasn't DLC Fiesta. It was a game I bought for $60 that gave me 60 hours worth of content.
Hmm.
And I have to praise it for that because in today's gaming atmosphere, it seems like that's more and more impossible to get to happen. You know, even something as simple as Crash Team Racing gets ruined by microtransactions. So I was very happy about that, at least because I saw where Square was headed with games like Lightning Returns
Hmm.
and thought to myself, this could be another Lightning Returns.
Hmm.
And but they didn't. They made it a game that's good and fun, and you can still buy it and play it on patch one and enjoy it. So I got to give them credit where credit is due. Um, but me personally, overall, I enjoyed it. I'm excited for part two. I'm excited for the Yuffie DLC. There's different things that people are complaining about with that, but it at least looks fun. Um, and I don't know what the heck they're going to do for part two. I don't know how it's going to work because I everyone's talking about when it's going to end, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe at the city, but I don't know. How do you make it a world? How do you make it a world at that point?
Yeah.
Because all it is
Yeah.
Midgar.
Yes.
How do you do the world map? How do you do the transition between having crazy Bahamut fights to now we have to be like weak again and go to calm and go to the Chocobo farm? Like it's just going to be weird. I don't know how they're going to do it. I've
Yeah.
come up with some ideas and I hope Square is listening and take some of them because I think some of them are decent, but um, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know how the world map's going to work. I don't know how they're going to improve on the combat because with turn based, you can get really far without it getting stale. But with action RPGs, you know, after 60 hours of the remake, it's kind of stale. So
Hmm.
if part two is more of that, it's going to be stale. They have to switch it up somehow. There's a reason why every Devil May Cry game you get like brand new mechanics and brand new
Hmm.
weapons and sometimes even brand new characters because that stuff gets stale after a while, at least for the casual player.
Hmm.
So they have to do something. They have to change it up. It can't just be more part one, but you get Red 13 now. Like they
Yeah.
have to do something big and different, and there has to be some way that the world map works. Or it's just going to be a list of missions again, and all the missions are the places they go: Calm, Chocobo Forest, or Chocobo Farm, the mine, like Mithril Cave. I hate for it to just be a list of missions, and the missions are the locations. That just feels like that's not Final Fantasy VII. I get it for Midgar; it made sense for Midgar, but now we need some kind of exploration,
Hmm.
or else it's not going to feel like the Final Fantasy VII world.
Yeah. I totally
So
agree.
so I don't know. There's a lot of questions, and I think there's a reason why they haven't said anything about it yet because they're trying to figure those answers out themselves right now.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's funny. Like I wouldn't have guessed that Final Fantasy Remake Part One. We ended with more questions than maybe we even had before Remake Part One happened.
Oh, they had
Uh,
to do that. That was
It's just
brilliant,
crazy.
honestly, because I think if they hadn't done that, part one would have sold really well, and part two would have sold like dirt.
Hmm.
because
I agree.
who like part 1 had so much hype because it was the remake. It was the remake we've waited 10, 12, 15 years for.
Hmm.
But part 2 is just the second part. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't have the same hype. So they had to do
yeah,
something. They had to go crazy at the end and be like, this is why you need part 2. So
yeah.
I know a
I
lot of
totally
people
agree.
hate how crazy the ending was, but like I feel like from their perspective they kind of had to do it.
Yeah, I said the
Um,
same thing when I was talking to Daryl from Final Fantasy Union. We were discussing it as well, and I said the same thing that you said. I mean, to me, it's like, when you're in the moment, it felt kind of like crazy and wacky, like what the hell's going on? Like, why is this happening and all this stuff? Could it have not just been different? But I think when you really just think about it, it couldn't really have happened many other ways. I think like this was what just needed to happen for this game,
yeah.
and that poses enough of its own questions already. But then it has that whole like trickle down effect to all of those other things that you were talking about, like how, to me, Final Fantasy VII, like you say, it's a world game, like it's about the world. And so for Midgar, having this sort of self-contained, very linear, you go from town to town, all this kind of stuff, it's sort of it works fine, like sector to sector, but like expanding that out into the entire rest of the game, it just doesn't feel possible. Like with what they have right now, I just can't see it. So in terms of where I'm at, I'd probably say, I think like you, I really like Final Fantasy VII Remake. I really enjoyed my experience with it. I think they did a great job. For me, it just visually and like in terms of how they design the characters, the voice acting, the environments, like all of these things, I really just felt like they absolutely nailed it, and it retained, like the characters felt like who I thought they were. Some of them added like positive, so the more like quippy style that Cloud has is a bit more, seems a little bit more extroverted, and he's not quite as like brooding and like a downer and everything as he seemed in the original game and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we
So
had a lot of conversations about that. People asked me like, did they ruin Cloud? And my response to that is, you can't make, like in the original, Cloud was completely like shot, like his psyche was just shot in Midgar.
mhm,
He didn't know who he was. He was basically being Zack at that point,
mhm.
and being like super brooding and whatever. And that worked because Midgar was 3 hours long,
Yeah,
or 5 or 6 or 7 hours long. It was not the entire game. You can't have an entire game where Cloud is just like this standoffish, brooding, terrible character. There had to be something there. Like they had to have some kind of character development. So what they did instead was they had this little development with him and Tifa, where the first time he meets Tifa, he's like standoffish, and then he slowly warms up to Tifa,
mhm,
which they do in the original, but it's spread out a lot more.
mhm.
In this one, it's just Midgar that happens because they needed something. He needed some kind of character development. If
Yeah.
Cloud had been only the same way he was in the original, it would have been like the most boring main character of all time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think everything that I saw that I could say was different or added compared to the original, like almost exclusively, I viewed them positively.
Hmm.
Like, the stuff, I think it's chapter 4 where we get to hang out with like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, and we go to like Jesse's house and stuff. Like all of that stuff, I absolutely love that. I mean, I love going on that little mission with them, and all the stuff that they added, I thought was definitely cool, and I enjoyed it. I think the only thing, obviously, like at the end was the whole kind of what are the names, the whispers and all that stuff. I just couldn't help
Yeah.
but feel like really, do we need that?
Yeah, the
The,
fates I'm still wishy-washy on. And like I said, it's cool that they did a big thing at the end,
mm,
but I do agree. I'm very I don't like it. I have gone back and forth on it, and I think I can say now like it could have been done differently. I hope that they build on it in part 2, because right now people are saying that we killed the fates, so they're not going to be in the second game.
mm-hmm,
And there was some interview that came out where someone on the team had said that 2 is going to be closer to the original than 1 was.
right.
So people were saying, okay, for sure, no fates. It's just going to be story now. They're not going to go crazy in part 2, which I like and dislike, because as a Final Fantasy VII guy, it sounds pretty good that 2 is going to be close to the original. But at the same time, I wanted some kind of explanation for what happened in part 1.
Yeah,
Because if part 1 is crazy and nonsensical and Square comes out and they say, listen, we know what we're doing, just trust us. Like, it's crazy, but there's a purpose. And then in part 2 there's no purpose, then people are going to look at part 1 and be like, well, what were you doing? Like, what what
Yeah.
was the point of all this? So I hope there's at least some kind of explanation as to why Aerith seems to be like a omniscient kind of person. Like, she already knows what happened, and Sephiroth seems to already know Aerith. Like, I hope there's some kind of explanation for not just because people have come out and come up with all these different lore and ideas behind it, but I want like a specific thing that they say in the game. One of the characters says it. This
Hmm.
is what happened. This is why. So we
Yeah.
get some kind of closure on part 1, because like I said, it's
Yeah.
great that they went crazy for part 1, but if they went crazy for part 1 and got our trust that way, and then part 2 is normal, then everyone's going to look at part 1 and be like, what were they doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it puts it on a knife edge really, because it could go anywhere from there. Like for me, I'd rather, like you say, the closure stuff, just to get a bit more just sort of explicit, like what the hell happened there and what's the deal with this stuff. I definitely agree. I think we definitely need that. But like when I look back on what I found, what I didn't like story wise and stuff about Final Fantasy VII Remake, it almost always involved the whispers and like the way they intervened and when they did intervene, when they didn't intervene, why they intervened sometimes, why they didn't intervene sometimes. It's just like when you introduce a story element like that, it just so many things can go wrong. They're just like, I'd rather just not have them for the rest of the story. Like I get it, they used them in the first one and they built it up to turn into this big like arbiter of fate at the end, and we got our like typical Final Fantasy big epic battle at the end to round off what is basically a standalone Final Fantasy game anyway. Even though it's in Midgar, it's basically its own game at that point. So I get all of that stuff, but it's like I really like, my heart just says I'm okay with heading back towards like the original story, because the reason I say that is because, well, up until like chapter 18 or like towards the end of chapter 17, it really did follow the original pretty closely, and most of the stuff was just sort of extra little additions and that kind of thing. So I wasn't like, when I was in like chapter 15, I was like, oh man, this is just basically a repeat of the story, or this is too much like the original, and I'm not enjoying this. Like, I think the original story is so strong that if they just take that original and they do what they got to do, they chop and change certain bits to make it fit into however long the game can be, and maybe they add a bit about some extra characters that we didn't have before. So give us some new stuff that maybe was left on the cutting floor, or new ideas they came up with, a new depth, that kind of stuff, which is great. But like, do I really want like a chapter 18 version of Final Fantasy VII Remake for that to be like the thing going forward? Like for me, I'd rather that didn't happen.
Oh, and it was just too much. Like, they just intervened too much. They didn't need that much. And one of my biggest issues with the Fates is that it makes the main cast look weak.
Hmm.
One of my Probably my least favorite scene of the entire game is when they're fighting Motorball, and that the top part of the highway breaks, and it's like
Okay.
going towards the car, and then the Fates come in and like save them.
Yeah.
I hated that, because now it seems like our party is like incapable of actually succeeding their mission. And if it weren't for the Fates, they would have just died on the highway in the middle of the motorball chase and nothing else would have happened. Like, imagine in the original if Cloud had just fallen off the bike on his way to motorball and that's how the story ended. Like, he just wasn't fast enough and that's it.
Yeah.
So it just makes the party seem inadequate. Like, they're just not that strong. We want to have faith in our party members. Like, we
Hmm.
want them to be strong and we want to role play as them because they're cool and strong and epic. And the Fates kind of made it seem like they were just jokesters. Like, oh, we just kind of happened to get through it alive because the Fates kind of just saved us a ton of times.
Yeah, and
Um,
especially given when that happens in the story, this is supposed to be like the final build up towards whatever the finale is going to be. We're supposed to be feeling at our like, we've already been playing for like 30, 35 hours. We know the gameplay, like we know the characters, we've got our stats up and all that kind of stuff. Now should be the time when we're getting into that mode. But like it's always about, well, do the fates want this to happen or not? And well, if they don't, then it doesn't really matter what your characters want or how strong they are or anything. It's just like, oh, I'll just suck wedge out of a building, and it's just like,
yeah.
okay, why did you let him survive the fall in the first place, and why did you wait that long before you decide to just eject him from the story again? It's just like, what? It was just weird. That the whole thing with Barrett and the president, where like it looks like Barrett dies, but then it's like, oh no, he didn't actually die, because the fates were like, oh shit, sorry, we forgot that he wasn't
Yeah,
supposed to die. We let him get stabbed. We made a
right.
mistake. Quick, rewind, like, or do whatever. Give him CPR, like whatever he
Yeah,
needs. Come
are they
on, like,
omniscient or not? Like, do they know everything that's going to happen, or was that somehow something that they forgot? Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. They're either super omniscient beings and everything they do matters, or they're not. But you also have a
yeah,
bunch of fights where you kill the fates, like you kill them,
yeah,
and then get to where, like, there's that part where they're trying to get to the seventh heaven bar, and the fates are like trying to stop them. Why?
hmm,
Like, why did they
yeah.
need to stop them? And then Cloud kills them, and then they get to the seventh heaven bar, and then nothing happens. So why were the fates trying to stop Cloud from getting to the bar? Why was that
Yeah.
essential to their mission? That he just got there, and then they were like, okay, let's go. So
It was so confusing, man. I remember when I first got the game, I got it about 10 days before release. Square Enix sent it to me. And that's great for the channel and the business. And like, I was super hype. I was loving it. But one of the worst things about that is there's no one else playing the game. And it's just like, I had no one to, like, stuff was happening. I remember in the playthrough, people probably noticed it. The first time the Whispers appeared, I thought, you had the ghosts in the train graveyard. I thought it was just those guys. Like, it was just like,
yeah,
for some reason in the remake, they were more prevalent or they were more of a nuisance in the town. And they just, like, I didn't realize that it was like this sort of big arbiters of fate and all this kind of stuff. I just thought they were just random ghosts from the ghost town, or like the
yeah.
the railway area. So I was so confused, and I remember, like, at that time, it would have been nice to just kind of look it up and be like, "What are these guys? What are they doing here?" And I just had no one to ask, so I just kept like rolling with it. And by the time it became clear what it was, I was like, "Wait a minute, what the fuck?" Like, the story wasn't heading this way. And then it just
I
it
kind of
was
wish that
weird.
you had thought that the entire playthrough, like you never got past that. And then you
Yeah,
got to the Arbiter of Fate and you were like, wait a second, we're way past the train graveyard. Like, we
yeah.
already beat these guys. What? I can't believe the final boss was the ghost from the train grave. You go to do some review on YouTube and you're like, okay, so I loved the final train graveyard boss. And everyone thinks you're talking about the train graveyard boss. And then you show the Arbiter and they're like, what is this guy talking about? He's
Yeah.
still in the train graveyard.
It nearly was that for a long time. It was longer than I would have expected, because I just didn't think, everything felt so familiar that I was playing, that when I saw something like that, I just linked it to something that I already knew from the original game. I just didn't see it as like a,
Yeah, that makes total sense. I could totally see that.
yeah. And like, when I didn't have anyone to ask about it, I was just like, I just rolled with it. I thought, okay, train ghosts are just, they're just a bigger crew of ghosts now. Like, I don't know. It was weird, man. I think for this round one of this podcast, I think let's call it here. There's still some questions and stuff that I have, but I'm sure we can do this again in the future, and
Yeah,
we'll have
absolutely.
plenty of stuff to chat about. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I had a blast, and I will see you next time.
Thanks.